Chapter 276. For countless years, the dark pattern of Zhongzhou State had always been extremely stable. Jade Pool, Mount Shu, Azura Path, Great Soaring Temple, big and small forces all had their own romance. But the ones who really stood at the peak 20 years ago were the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family. In the past 2 decades, it was the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. Sai City stood aloof from the world. In terms of comprehensive strength and heritage, it was much worse than the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. Therefore, even though Sai City also had invincible realm experts and murderous weapons, in the eyes of the public, the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City were still in charge of the overall situation in Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State was a forbidden zone in the dark world. This was something that all the superpowers knew. The unfathomable Wang family of Beihai, the powerful Li family, and the slick Kunlun City, no matter who stood at the highest point of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, had an amazingly consistent attitude toward the outside world. That was rejection. Zhongzhou State refused any foreign superpowers to enter Zhongzhou State. For many years, although it was impossible for the superpowers to have no foundation in Zhongzhou State, they did not make any achievements. The Jiang family of South America had 3 invincible realm experts. How glorious was that? In Zhongzhou State, there were only a few temporary imperial residences similar to clubhouses, and they were even deserted all year round. This kind of unity against the outside world was an absolutely terrifying pressure for anyone. Because of this, Li Tianlan was so surprised when he heard military counselor's words. The Real Foundation of Samsara Palace was in Zhongzhou State? How did you hide from the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City? Li Tianlan looked into military counselor's eyes and asked seriously. Before, the Samsara Palace could be stable because Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyan didn't pay much attention to it. Now that the Samsara Palace had shown great strength and was getting farther and farther away from Zhongzhou State, it was impossible for the other party to not take action. But in the end, their so-called action turned out to be just blocking Qin Weibai's Pre-Qin International Group. This showed that it was not that they didn't want to move, but they really didn't notice the changes in Zhongzhou State. Was the arrangement of the Samsara Palace too flawless? Or could it be that this so-called foundation was actually so small that it couldn't be noticed? We don't have a headquarters. The military counselor's answer was simple and straightforward. Without the headquarters, there was no need to be afraid of others finding out. This sounded like a reason, but it also didn't seem like a reason. The existence of the saber has always been very hidden. The reason why no one has noticed it is actually because these resources have not been used for all these years. Everything is normal. Naturally, there will be no abnormalities. Military counselor looked at Li Tianlan. His face was hidden behind the cloak, and only a thin outline could be vaguely seen. On the surface, Samsara Palace has withdrawn from Zhongzhou State. At least in Zhongzhou State, we will not be the target of some people for the time being. Their target now is you. Li Tianlan remained silent. It's been quite lively here these past few days. 3 groups of people have come one after another. It seems that the fact that you're still alive has really stimulated some people. So much so that they can't sit still anymore. They all want to see your current state. Military counselor chuckled. His laughter echoed in the security room, and it was extremely cold. 12 fire-flaming realm experts and 1 thunder-shocking realm expert. It's really a big deal. If it weren't for fear of exposing their identities, it's possible that the experts at the peak of thunder-shocking realm, or even a half-step invincible realm expert would come in person. Li Tianlan didn't know what would happen to those people. Bamboo Forest and Volcano were disguised as security guards. He didn't need to think to know what would happen to those people. He shook his head in self-mockery. What kind of people are they? Kunlun City? Or the Prince Group? Or the overseas forces? Why not the Wang family of Beihai? Military counselor asked in a playful tone. When this question was asked, Li Tianlan suddenly froze. In the past few days he didn't know that someone had been sending people to test here. But now that he knew, he realized that he didn't doubt the Wang family of Beihai at all. It was just a feeling. This kind of thing didn't seem to be done by Wang Tianzong at all. Li Tianlan didn't know much about Wang Tianzong. But every time he met him, he could clearly feel the kind of boldness, great talent, bold strategy, and indifferent like the mountains and the sea. Such a man didn't need to send cannon fodder to test this kind of means. Li Tianlan felt that the other party would definitely send someone to ask what he wanted to know. It was aboveboard, just like how he took Wang Yuetong away tonight. It was simply irresistible. The Wang family of Beihai did let the Li family down. Li Tianlan actually didn't hate Wang Tianzong. Even if the combination of Surge Potion, Immortality Potion, and Against the Way of Heaven was a conspiracy, it didn't matter whether he knew the so-called conspiracy in advance or not. In the situation of Changdao at that time, he had no way out. Why would he care about these things? It was actually ridiculous. Although the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai were now on opposite sides, Li Tianlan didn't think that Wang Tianzong was a bad person. But he had his goal. And he had something that he had to get back. Different ways. That was all. The Wang family of Beihai wouldn't do such a thing. Li Tianlan said. In his mind, the Wang family of Beihai and Wang Tianzong were the kind of force and opponent that deserved respect even if they were enemies. Just like the Li family many years ago, they were upright. Even if they didn't get along, from an objective point of view, it was hard to say what was wrong with them. I agree with you. Military counselor smiled. But I don't know who the other party is. It doesn't make sense. Anyway, they are all dead. Senior Li is still here. In a short time, they dare not do anything to you. If I go to investigate, I can find out, but I will inevitably leave some clues. If there are too many clues, the existence of the saber will be exposed. At this stage, it's not worth the loss. Saber, Li Tianlan said silently and calmly. The scabbard, the blade, the hilt, the saber intent, the saber light. The saber is one. What about you? Which part are you? I am the hand holding the saber. Military counselor's smile was unfathomable. Palace Master is the real saber holder. Very mysterious. Li Tianlan said slowly. But what's the point of being afraid of exposing the mystery? It's not that I'm afraid of being exposed. It's just that the time is not ripe. Your Highness, you are likely to be the next saber holder, but it's not the right time for me to tell you everything. The existence of the saber is too meticulous. A little clue may destroy the overall situation. And at this delicate time, the overall situation cannot be destroyed. Military counselor raised the wine glass in front of him and toasted Li Tianlan. His movements were very respectful and his words were very euphemistic, but the meaning was extremely obvious. Now Li Tianlan was not qualified to touch these things. Li Tianlan smiled. He was not angry because it was the truth. What do you want? He looked at military counselor and asked. For the time being, military counselor smiled. His face was hidden in the darkness, but Li Tianlan could feel his clear eyes. Now we just want to create a sky without shadows. A sky without shadows. Li Tianlan was thoughtful. He seemed to have guessed something and sighed softly. And then, military counselor was silent for a long time, then shook his head and said, Who knows if there will be anything that hasn't happened? Your Highness just needs to grow up patiently. If everything goes well, everything will probably become clear in 5 or 6 years. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and looked at military counselor. 5 or 6 years later. This year was the 4th year of the term of President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State. 5 or 6 years later. The most delicate, tense, and intense sensitive period of the general change in Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan didn't know if he was thinking in the wrong direction. How is your Highness's state now? Military counselor interrupted Li Tianlan's thinking and asked seriously. Do you still need external help? No need. Li Tianlan shook his head. I can only rely on myself now. Military counselor hesitated. I heard that the Imperial Jade Seal is in your Highness's hands. If your Highness doesn't need it, maybe you can give it to Tribulation. There's a big problem with his breakthrough. If I'm not mistaken, although Tribulation has entered the invincible realm, his comprehensive combat capability is not even as good as mine. As far as I know, the Imperial Jade Seal is one of the best solutions. Li Tianlan was stunned and asked subconsciously, What's the problem? After he returned to East Emperor Palace, Tribulation had come twice. Li Tianlan could clearly feel that he was indeed in the invincible realm now. But after the breakthrough, he was still not as good as military counselor, who was now a half-step invincible realm? Before the breakthrough, tribulation was definitely stronger than military counselor. I don't know. Military counselor was a little vague. It should be that the breakthrough was too intense and the burden on his body was too great, so that he couldn't exert all his strength. Li Tianlan thought about the imperial jade seal that was now in his room. Is that thing useful? Your Highness's resurrection is enough to explain everything. Military counselor said in an affirmative tone. Li Tianlan suddenly understood. His resurrection was because of luck. The imperial jade seal of Zhongzhou State was definitely one of the most prosperous things. I see. Li Tianlan nodded and said, I will give the imperial jade seal to Marshal Uncle. He suddenly looked at military counselor and said meaningfully, but I'm curious. How did you know that this thing is in my hands? Military counselor was silent. Behind the black cloak, he seemed to smile again. Li Tianlan didn't ask more. He took a sip of wine and said, Is there anything else? Nothing. Military counselor said. Your Highness, what's your next plan? Start over. What else can I do? Li Tianlan laughed at himself. He suddenly thought of Qin Weibai, who said it had nothing to do with him, Wang Yuetong, who waved with tears when she just left, and Dongqing Rushi, who was hard to distinguish between good and evil behind the red lovesickness. Li Tianlan's eyes were a little dim. It will be fine, military counselor said softly. If your Highness is worried about the departure just now, you don't have to. I can assure your Highness that the way Wang Yuetong was picked up today, she will be sent back in the future. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. The Wang family of Beihai is indeed very powerful. In my opinion, and even in the opinion of many people, the current Wang family of Beihai can even be said to be the #1 power in the dark world in terms of comprehensive strength. But a big tree has dry branches. The Wang family of Beihai has been developing for too many years. Their foundation is desperate, but there are already problems inside. Military counselor said with an indescribable emotion. Wang Tianzong is really talented and bold. Some problems inside the Wang family of Beihai have been suppressed by his own strength over the years. But it's better to let them out than to block them. Some problems have been suppressed for too long and will break out one day. Now it seems that that day will not be too far away. Li Tianlan straightened up, and his eyes began to sparkle. There was a problem inside the Wang family of Beihai? And it was already to the point of breaking out? This news was definitely good news for the Li family today. How far is it? Not too far away? Li Tianlan asked in a deep voice. About 5 or 6 years later, unless Wang Tianzong has the ability to reach the sky, the Wang family of Beihai will only welcome the change with Zhongzhou State. Military counselor said indifferently. 5 or 6 years later. Another 5 or 6 years later. Li Tianlan's heart was full of ups and downs. He thought for a long time, then picked up the glass and drank up the wine in it. It's too far away to say this, he said. Any opportunity requires strength. 5 or 6 years, there is still time. His eyes gradually became firm. He seemed to have made up his mind. Military counselor looked at him in confusion. I seem to know my way. Li Tianlan smiled. Since returning to East Emperor Palace, his eyes became completely peaceful for the first time. He was not lost, not irritable, not at a loss, not helpless. Only concentration was left. Even though it's hard. He stood up, nodded to military counselor, and walked directly out of the security room. Bamboo Grove and Volcano stood outside the door. Seeing Li Tianlan come out, they bowed subconsciously. Li Tianlan didn't say much. He came out of the security room and walked back to East Emperor Palace. His steps were slow, but they became more and more firm. The moonlight in the sky was still cold. It was past midnight. At this time, today, it was the Mid-Autumn Festival. Li Tianlan walked into East Emperor Palace, which was as luxurious as a palace. Instead of going back to his room, he went to Yu Donglai's room. Yu Donglai's room was not locked. The room was dark. On the windowsill facing the window, there was a delicate small bottle. Li Tianlan smiled, walked over, and picked up the bottle. This was what Yu Donglai left him before he left. It was also what he hesitated to give to Li Tianlan in the end. It was also what helped Li Tianlan make up his mind. Li Tianlan looked at the bottle, his eyes persistent. There was no time for him to hesitate. He had to take this step after all. Li Tianlan opened the bottle cap. The room was full of fragrance. On the last night of the final battle of Changdao, he saw the real commanding heights of martial arts. He saw the real invincible road of the invincible realm, but he also saw his end at that time. He had wind and thunder veins. He had exquisite bone. His will was as firm as a rock. His inheritance was unparalleled in the world. But everything he had could not reach the end he saw. In this case, just like what he said in Changdao, it was better to give up. Li Tianlan pursed his lips tightly. In fact, Li Honghe had already told him the essence of martial arts, even though his grandfather did not see the end at that time. The so-called martial arts was not a realm or a constitution. It was only sword intent. Li Tianlan raised his hand and drank the fragrant potion in the bottle. The violent medicine suddenly broke out in his body, violently pulling every meridian in his body. It was the most violent destruction and destruction. Li Tianlan was expressionless. He held the bottle tightly, and his hands suddenly shook. The two meridians running through his limbs suddenly tightened to the limit in his body, and suddenly broke. Puff! A mouthful of blood spurted out of his mouth. His face was pale, and his breath suddenly became extremely weak. Wind and thunder veins. The wind and thunder veins that he was proud of were directly destroyed by him in the most violent way. Li Tianlan's breath was weak, but in the dark room, a sword intent began to take shape slowly. The sword intent seemed to exist in the whole room, but also seemed to spread to every corner of his body. Blood flowed down from Li Tianlan's legs and arms, dripping down his white clothes into the room. Li Tianlan looked at the dark sky outside the window. There was only concentration in his eyes. Chapter 277. The second day after the Mid-Autumn Festival. August 16th. Li Beitian and Yi Huayu went to Mount Shu as if they had made an appointment. Ning Qianqing and Yu Qingyan went to Jinling. Su Chu went to Jade Pool. Du Hanin was still in the Sky Academy. Several young people from East Emperor Palace returned to East Emperor Palace almost at the same time. The weather was a little gloomy after the Mid-Autumn Festival. Thick clouds rolled and stirred in the sky. Li Tianlan was no longer in front of the clear artificial lake. Only the golden retriever was lying lazily in front of the lake, wagging its tail. Li Beitian frowned and went directly into the luxurious palace, which was mostly made of glass. He went straight to Li Tianlan's bedroom on the third floor. Hurried footsteps echoed in the corridor. Li Beitian was the fastest. He was the first to reach the door of Li Tianlan's room. He reached out and was about to knock on the door when Li Tianlan, who had already heard the footsteps, opened the door. The moment their eyes met, both of them were stunned. So fast. Li Tianlan's tone was a little surprised. Looking at Li Beitian in front of him and Ning Qianqing and Su Chu behind him, he frowned and said, "Didn't you say you would come back the day after tomorrow?" Li Beitian's gloomy expression gradually melted. He heaved a sigh of relief and said softly, "Are you all right? What's wrong?" Li Tianlan turned sideways to let everyone in and said casually, "What can happen to me?" Li Beitian hesitated. "It's good that you're okay." Ning Qianqing looked at Li Tianlan's face and said calmly, "Has Yuetong left?" Li Tianlan glanced at him and nodded. "She was taken away by her father the day you left. We already know. Now everyone knows that you can't be reached by phone, so we rushed back." Ning Qianqing took a deep breath and said with a smile, "It's good that you're okay. Well, with the reputation of the Wang family of Beihai, they won't take this opportunity to embarrass you." Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes slightly. It was not until then that he found that everyone's expression was a little dignified, except for the initial worry and gloom. "Everyone knows?" Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Yu Donglai, who was standing behind several young people, suddenly sighed, walked to the side, and sat down silently. Du Hanin's expression was calm. Yi Huayu and Yu Qingyan were at a loss. Li Beitian's eyes were cold. Ning Qianqing just smiled bitterly and nodded. "Everyone knows." He especially emphasized the word everyone, as if he wanted to show how broad the scope of this word was. "Oh," Li Tianlan said expressionlessly. However, there was a hint of ridicule in his eyes. Everyone answered Li Tianlan's question 2 days ago. That was the appearance of Wang Tianzong on the night before the Mid-Autumn Festival. The number 1 on the divine list and the dignified Sword Emperor, no matter how much he valued Ding Hao, would not come all the way here to say a few words to him. As for picking up Wang Yuetong, it was not necessary for him to come in person. Now the power of the Wang family of Beihai in Huading was gradually recovering. Lu Shuanghua of Jiangnan Society, Yi Fengcheng, the director of Huading Special Operations Bureau, Wang Xiaorao, the Zhang family, and even Yu Chuanguang, the mayor of Huading, Li Tianlan could not stop them from taking Wang Yuetong away. Wang Yuetong did not have the courage to resist the whole family, and she was not in danger. In any case, Wang Tianzong coming in person seemed redundant. But for someone like him, how could his every move really be superfluous? That day he went to see his grandfather, and came to see Ding Hao. It turned out that it was not on the way. He took Wang Yuetong away. That was a signal. It was a signal that everyone knew by now. Li Tianlan was very clear that no one would know what Wang Tianzong talked about with his grandfather when he went to Linen. But after coming back from Linen, he took Wang Yuetong away directly, which could explain a lot of problems. There was no problem with Wang Yuetong's departure, but in the eyes of others, with Wang Yuetong's departure, the attitude of the Wang family of Beihai became completely clear. What everyone now knew was not only that Wang Tianzong took Wang Yuetong away, but the deeper meaning of this so-called signal was that the Wang family of Beihai did not welcome Li Tianlan, the heavenly son of Zhongzhou State. The signal had been sent out. Next, the Wang family of Beihai did not need to do anything, because it was time for Kunlun City to take action. And when the Wang family of Beihai showed its attitude, some other wait-and-see forces in Zhongzhou State would also show their corresponding attitudes. And these attitudes were the so-called general trend. The general trend of Zhongzhou State. The general trend could only go with the flow. As expected. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and said slowly. He did not think of Wang Tianzong's deep meaning, but he had already been mentally prepared for what would happen next. I heard from Commander Ning that there may be some changes in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State recently, specifically, Ning Qianqing said. When he mentioned his father, he just called him Commander Ning stiffly. Li Tianlan interrupted him and said with a smile, "I've already heard it from Marshal Dongqing. As soon as Yuetong left, the matter of the Special Warfare Department should be settled, right? This is not a matter of a short time, but the final result should not be unexpected. This is a systematic reform, and the opinions of the higher-ups are a little chaotic. If I'm not wrong, they should make a pilot first." Ning Qianqing thought of the inside story that Ning Ziyuan intentionally or unintentionally told him, and his tone was a little complicated. Pilot in the southeast? The look of mockery in Li Tianlan's eyes became clearer. Ning Qianqing nodded and said, "The Southeast Special Warfare Headquarters should be established in a few days, but the headquarters has not been determined yet." Commander Ning said that if there is no accident, the headquarters will be either in Huating or Linen. Li Tianlan's pupils contracted and he narrowed his eyes. If the Southeast Special Warfare Headquarters was set up in Huating, everyone had nothing to say. It was a municipality with an extremely important status, and the headquarters should be set up here. But it was unusual to set it up in Linen. Several provinces in the southeast were rich and powerful, but in terms of status, Jinling was definitely a little higher than Linen. The Southeast Special Warfare Headquarters was currently set up in Linen. The Li family that reappeared in Zhongzhou State was now in Linen. "Sit down." Li Tianlan waved his hand and sat down. He did not speak for a long time. Everyone was waiting for Li Tianlan's reaction. The establishment of the Special Warfare Headquarters was a disaster for any young force that needed to rise quickly to achieve a certain goal, and the East Emperor Palace would be particularly affected. "What's the attitude of Mount Shu?" Li Tianlan suddenly asked. He did not ask Ning Qianqing about the attitude of the Eastern Theater of Operations, which was the sphere of influence of the Southeast Group. Not to mention whether Ning Ziyuan was willing to do anything for his son. Even if he wanted to, He had to listen to Wang Tianzong. He also did not ask Su Chu. Jade Pool and the Dongqing clan were of the same breath and branches, and the Dongqing clan would definitely stand on his side. As for Mount Shu, Li Tianlan suddenly wanted to know the attitude of Mount Shu. Eldest senior brother has no specific attitude for the time being. Li Beitian shook his head. He hesitated and said with a wry smile, "We are all on the same side, so I'll say something directly. I guess this secret can't be kept for long. During the Battle of Changdao, didn't you wonder why the leader was third senior brother instead of eldest senior brother?" Li Tianlan's heart moved, but he did not speak. Wei Kunlun, the Nirvana sword master of Mount Shu. He was one of the top 10 contemporary experts of Zhongzhou State, a top expert of the half-step invincible realm. Why didn't he participate in the Battle of Changdao? Li Tianlan's eyes were a little playful. Because at that time, eldest senior brother was trying his best to break through the realm, trying to enter the invincible realm. Li Beitian said with a wry smile. But he failed. Now he is seriously injured, and his realm has fallen from the half-step invincible realm to the peak of the thundershocking realm. At this time, Mount Shu can only keep silent about this matter. He suddenly looked at Li Tianlan and continued, "But eldest senior brother asked me to tell you something. Take a step back, and you will see the world." Li Tianlan's expression changed. He looked at Li Beitian seriously and said softly, "I remember something. The three of us happened to be assigned to the same dormitory in the Sky Academy. It's not a coincidence, right?" Li Beitian's face froze. Ning Qianqing's expression was also a little unnatural. But now after seeing Dongqing Wudi, Li Tianlan already knew that Ning Qianqing and him sharing the same dormitory was arranged by the Dongqing clan. As for Li Beitian, Li Tianlan asked softly, "Was it arranged by Wei Kunlun?" Li Beitian hesitated and said with a wry smile, "No, it's not a big deal. It's really not a coincidence that we are in the same dormitory. I was entrusted by someone to help you when I can, so that you can become stronger as soon as possible. But it wasn't eldest senior brother who made these arrangements. He didn't know you at that time. It was second senior brother who asked me to appear by your side." Second senior brother. Li Tianlan looked stunned. The other young people were a little confused. Only Yu Donglai showed a look of understanding after a little pause. His eyes lit up. Second senior brother of Mount Shu. To be precise, the so-called second senior brother was not a senior brother, but a senior sister. Yin Qinxi, the phantom sword master. She was also the most mysterious sword master of Mount Shu. A giant of Mount Shu, a woman and a half-step invincible realm expert. Such an identity was worth gossiping about anywhere. When Li Tianlan was in Changdao, he heard Deep Dream, the top assassin of Sai City, mention Yin Qinxi. It was said that this phantom sword master had a very bad relationship with Situt Songyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou State. They were even incompatible. Because of this, Li Tianlan became more confused. He had thought that Li Beitian was with him because of Wei Kunlun's arrangement, but now Yin Qinxi appeared. Since she had a bad relationship with the Lord of Sai City, why would she help him? "Does your second senior brother know me?" Li Tianlan couldn't help asking. "No, I don't." Li Beitian shook his head. He looked at Li Tianlan with a strange look in his eyes and said in a strange tone, "Although second senior brother doesn't know you. But Tianlan, you don't really think that your old master has done nothing but guard the border all these years, do you?" The old master Li Beitian mentioned was naturally Li Honghe. But the problem was that Li Tianlan knew nothing. And it seemed that Li Beitian knew something. "What do you know?" Li Tianlan asked directly. "In terms of age, I'm a few years older than you. But when the Li family had an accident, I was still young. What could I know?" Li Beitian said helplessly. "But I heard first senior brother mention old master Li by accident before. I forgot the details, but first senior brother said that in the whole Zhongzhou state, if we say that old fox. No, Wiley, well, if we say that old man gets stronger. Ahem. Anyway, that's what he meant. First senior brother said that in this respect, Senior Li is the real #1 person in Zhongzhou state." Li Tianlan felt a little strange. Old fox, Wiley. That was what Wei Kunlun wanted to express at that time. But his grandfather had been quiet all these years. What was he planning? What was it? Li Tianlan's curiosity was completely aroused. Why did he say that? Li Beitian frowned and shook his head. In his memory, the only time first senior brother mentioned the Li family, he seemed to be a little drunk. He was indeed better at drinking than Wei Kunlun, but if Wei Kunlun drank too much, how could Li Beitian be any better? He could only remember bits and pieces of the conversation from that time. I only remember 4 words. Chapter 278. Everyone present was silent. For the vast majority of young people in Zhongzhou State, the Li family represented the former glory and the current decline. Li Honghe. What kind of person was the former war god of Zhongzhou State, who had been gradually forgotten over the years, but reappeared in the eyes of the world after the border war? It was worth everyone's curiosity. After all, no matter how poor the Li family was, Li Honghe was now a peerless expert in the invincible realm. No matter how cruel the dark world was or how rigorous the special warfare system was, gossip among experts was also very popular. However, Li Beitian's revelation stopped there. After the amazing plot, there was nothing else, not even some of his own speculations, which made people feel awkward. If the amazing plot was a revelation, then what was the content of the so-called amazing plot was the real key. Li Beitian only remembered this, so Li Tianlan didn't feel it was appropriate to ask more. What are your plans? Li Tianlan suddenly asked after a moment of silence. He actually didn't care much about what Li Beitian said. Perhaps in the eyes of Wei Kunlun, the Nirvana sword master of Mount Shu, Li Honghe was a real scheming old fox. But in Li Tianlan's heart, he was his grandfather, the old man who guarded the last living space of the Li family for 20 years. If there was a so-called amazing plot, how could the Li family be so poor today? He glanced at Li Beitian and Ning Qiancheng, then at Du Hanin and Su Chu. Only then did he find that none of them needed his concern. What do you mean? Li Beitian froze for a moment and asked, looking at Li Tianlan. We all have to plan for our future. East Emperor Palace doesn't seem to have a bright future now. Li Tianlan whispered, so will East Emperor Palace still exist in the future? Ning Qiancheng interrupted Li Tianlan and asked. Of course. Li Tianlan answered without hesitation. This was his only way. Although he was the young governor of Sai City now, even if he became the governor in the future, he couldn't take Sai City for granted and turn it into the Li family. Only East Emperor Palace was his own force. Although the free forces were now about to be controlled by the special warfare divisions of various regions, and although this road was extremely difficult, there was only one way in front of Li Tianlan, and there was no other choice. As long as the East Emperor Palace is here, I will be here. Ning Qiancheng said calmly. We were assigned to the same dormitory for other reasons. But we didn't consider anything else when we joined the East Emperor Palace. You are my brother. If you are here and the East Emperor Palace is here, I will definitely be here. Do you think we will withdraw from the East Emperor Palace because of the Special Warfare Department? Li Beitian laughed and scolded. Damn it, I'm the Great Void Sword Master. Why should I be afraid of the Special Warfare Department? I came to the Sky Academy to help you. If I quit the East Emperor Palace now, wouldn't it make your road more difficult? I have no plans. The East Emperor Palace is good. I will stay here. Me too. Su Chu said calmly. If it weren't for young master, I would have died in East Island. I must get my revenge. It's only possible if I'm by your side. Du Hanin's voice was clear and cold, but extremely determined. Li Tianlan's heart gradually calmed down. He looked deeply at the people in front of him, smiled complicatedly, and said softly, You know what this means. If they stayed in the East Emperor Palace, it not only meant that their future was full of difficulties, but it also meant that the forces behind them had expressed a certain degree of support for Li Tianlan. If the East Emperor Palace wanted to rise against the trend, it would definitely fight with Kunlun City, the Wang family of Beihai, and the Prince Group in the future. When it was a life-and-death battle, this kind of support would become strength, but it might also become implicative. Don't worry so much. Ning Qiancheng said blandly. Who knows what will happen in the future? Even if something really happens, it's not us who make the choice. Because staying in the East Emperor Palace is our choice. He looked at Li Tianlan and said, "What about you? What's your choice? What kind of path is the East Emperor Palace going to take? Integrate into the new system, or continue to be a free force?" Integrating into the new system would naturally rise along with the current level of the East Emperor Palace. Now the East Emperor Palace was a division-level unit. After the reform of the special warfare system, the level issue might also be reformed. Synchronized with the military, the East Emperor Palace would become a battalion or a deputy regiment level, and then climb up step by step. The East Emperor Palace might become a new Special Operations Bureau, and then it might become a new Special Warfare Headquarters. But in the process, the East Emperor Palace might be broken up and become a name. After all, integrating into the new system meant accepting the direct leadership of the local Special Operations Bureau, the Special Warfare Headquarters, and even Kunlun City. If the higher-ups transferred Li Tianlan out of the so-called East Emperor Palace, Li Tianlan would have no way at all. Continue to be a free force? The East Emperor Palace would exist intact, and it seemed to have more opportunities for development. But it would also be controlled by the local Special Operations Bureau. No one could say what kind of scale it could develop in this way. Neither of these two paths was easy to take. Li Tianlan was the founder of the East Emperor Palace. When Ning Qianqing, Li Beitian, and the others decided to stay, Li Tianlan must plan the future of the East Emperor Palace. "I haven't decided yet." Li Tianlan shook his head. "There's still time." Li Beitian said, "The East Emperor Palace can't graduate in advance. It's better to maintain the status quo for the next 3 years. But we have to make plans in advance." "It doesn't make sense," Li Tianlan said softly. "The general trend is like a chessboard. In Zhongzhou State, Gu Xingyan and Wang Tianzong are all chess players, and we are just chess pieces on the chessboard. No matter how good our plans are, we can't escape the fate of being controlled at will. It doesn't matter which path we take now, because they can easily imprison our upward space. So any plans are meaningless." "So," Li Beitian raised his eyebrows, "become stronger." Li Tianlan's tone was straightforward. He reached out and flicked his fingers gently. In silence, a weak sword intent rose out of thin air. The sword intent was so weak, so small, and so illusory. It was a sword intent that was not worthy of anyone's attention. But Li Baiqian's pupils contracted in an instant. He couldn't stop thinking about that moment just now. The sword intent appeared and disappeared. It was not a majestic and sharp sword intent, but it had a quality that made him tremble. "I've started over," Li Tianlan said softly. Everyone noticed the moment the sword intent appeared. Yu Donglai, who had been silent, was the most excited. He suddenly stood up and took 2 steps. He looked at Li Tianlan and said, "What realm are you in now?" "No realm," Li Tianlan said softly. "It's enough to have sword intent." He used to stand at a very high place. For him now, there was only one realm in martial arts. That was the invincible realm. And he was only on the way to the invincible realm. His road had just begun. Li Tianlan's eyes were focused and calm. His future might be filled with thorns, but his martial path was already a smooth one. "Go back to the Sky Academy." Li Tianlan looked at Ning Qianqing and the others and said softly, "I know that you guys don't need to attend classes in the Sky Academy anymore. I'm not here, and there's no point in fighting for credits. But since you've entered the school, you have to learn something. The significance of the existence of the Special Warfare Academy is not absolute strength, but their ultimate specialties in various fields. No matter which path the East Emperor Palace takes in the future, we need sufficient strength and absolute merits." He paused, glanced at everyone in sight, and said softly, "So for the next period of time, the East Emperor Palace will be handed over to you." "What about you?" Ning Qianqing asked subconsciously. "Me," Li Tianlan smiled. The general trend was like a game of chess. Now he couldn't afford to play this game of chess, nor was he willing to be a chess piece. So he simply stopped playing and jumped out of the chessboard. "I'm going out for a walk," he said softly. Chapter 279. Leaving was not an escape, but the best choice now. Li Tianlan knew very well that he needed to let it go. He couldn't let it go, so why not let it go for the time being? The general trend was surging and magnificent. Li Tianlan thought that he couldn't afford to play now. Instead of struggling to move forward, it was better to take a step back. Just like the words that Nirvana Sword Master of Mount Shu asked Li Beitian to tell him. Take a step back and you will see the world. There were too many seemingly tragic failures in sad songs, but in the end, they all died because of untimely persistence. Li Tianlan decided to take a step back. Retreat out of the general trend, let go of fetters, grievances, the Li family, and even Qin Wei Bai. Pursue the purest sword intent with the most dedicated mind. The moment he destroyed his wind and thunder veins, he had already seen his path clearly. The path of a new beginning. No one asked Li Tianlan where he wanted to go. Only Yu Donglai whispered, "When are you going to leave?" Now. Li Tianlan's voice was as light as the clouds in the sky, with a sense of illusion that would disappear at any time. He could leave the night Wang Yuetong left. If he hadn't waited for Li Beitian and others to come back, he would have been on the way now. He stood up, looked at the young faces around him that represented infinite potential, and whispered, "East Emperor Palace is temporarily in your hands. Young master, I'll go with you." Su Chu stood up, and his thick and resolute face looked extremely determined. He was the first disciple of Jade Pool. He came to the Sky Academy this time because Bai Qingqian asked him to follow Li Tianlan. After the Battle of Changdao, Su Chu's strength broke through again, and he almost entered the thunder-shocking realm. It was really unnecessary to stay in the Sky Academy, and it was not his task. Li Tianlan shook his head and said with a chuckle, "This is my own path. You stay and guard my foundation for me." Su Chu wanted to say something but stopped. Li Tianlan had already turned his eyes to Ning Qianqing and Li Beitian. "Thank you," he said seriously. "We are brothers." Ning Qianqing's tone was as calm as plain water, without any ups and downs. Li Tianlan nodded with a smile. Nothing else mattered. "We are brothers. So we will not leave." This sentence could already represent everything. Li Tianlan glanced at Yu Donglai. Yu Donglai nodded and said nothing. He and Li Tianlan didn't need to say much. Nothing needed to be said. He turned around and walked straight out of the door. Her clothes were as white as snow. The sword was as red as blood. No one sent him off. Everyone silently watched Li Tianlan leave and walk out of the East Emperor Palace. The sky outside the window became increasingly gloomy and depressing. Li Tianlan walked past the artificial lake in front of the door and heard a faint sound behind him. His footsteps were met with resistance. The golden retriever, who had been lying by the lake, ran over and bit his trousers gently. Li Tianlan looked at the golden retriever Wang Yuetong gave him with a strange look. The golden retriever's name was Baby. No matter what it was called, it was still a dog. He squatted down and patted the golden retriever's head. The golden retriever wagged its tail and wanted to lick Li Tianlan's hand happily. "Go play." Li Tianlan pointed to the lake behind him. The golden retriever whimpered and circled around him. During Li Tianlan's time in the East Emperor Palace, whether he was sitting in a daze in front of the door or walking in the East Emperor Palace, he would be accompanied by this golden retriever most of the time. "Do you want to go with me?" Li Tianlan asked. Dogs were intelligent. The golden retriever immediately stopped circling and rushed up to lick Li Tianlan's face. Li Tianlan hugged it and said with a smile, "Well, with you and the sword, this journey is not lonely." The clouds were getting lower and lower. Heavy rain was about to fall from the sky. A black Volkswagen drove unhurriedly into a high-end community in the center of Huading under the gloomy sky. The car stopped in front of a residential building on the edge of the community. A thin figure wrapped in a black cloak got out of the car unhurriedly, entered the elevator, and went straight to the 9th floor. 1 unit per floor greatly guaranteed the privacy of the apartment. The man wrapped in a black cloak silently walked out of the elevator and directly entered the luxurious and exquisite home. A young woman of about 26 or 27 years old was sitting in the living room, making tea. The woman's figure was plump and delicate. She wore a close-fitting suit, which fully displayed her extremely beautiful figure. She seemed to have deliberately dressed up and put on light makeup. Her hair was wet from the shower. In the mist gradually rising from the tea, Her charming face seemed to become more and more attractive. The man wrapped in a black cloak walked into the living room. The young woman who had been quietly making tea stood up subconsciously and said softly, "Master." The man under the cloak answered in a low voice and asked directly, "What's the matter?" "Gu Hanshan and Gu Fengbo will arrive in Huiting tomorrow. He spoke to me on the phone not long ago. 3 days ago, Gu Hanshan successfully broke through to the thunder-shocking realm. This time he may come to Huiting to test Li Tianlan's current situation." The woman said softly, "Silence." The man under the cloak was silent for a while, and then said with a soft smile, "Is this information very important?" He reached out and pinched the woman's chin, admiring the woman's charming but uneasy young face. This was a face that many students of the Sky Academy were very familiar with. Lu Dongyu of the Lu family of Huiting. Everyone knew that the Lu family was an important part of the peripheral forces of Kunlun City, but few people knew that now because of the Imperial Jade Seal, the whole Lu family had completely turned to Li Tianlan. And Li Tianlan would also not know that Lu Dongyu, who was the first to surrender to him when he broke into the Lu family alone that night, had another position. Lu Dongyu had another position. What about the whole Lu family? Lu Dongyu's delicate body trembled slightly, not because of fear, but because her chin was pinched. Her whole face showed a kind of emotional flush and excitement. "I think the master must be very worried about the safety of young Governor Li, so he reported this information to you," Lu Dongyu said in a trembling voice. "Oh," the man in the cloak said with a little playfulness, "so you know my identity? I recognized the master when I was in Changdao." Lu Dongyu's voice trembled more and more seductively. Military counselor. Military counselor was silent for a while. After a long while, he let go of Lu Dongyu and sat directly on the sofa. Lu Dongyu knelt in front of military counselor with her charming eyes, trembling to untie his belt. "Kunlun City," military counselor murmured to himself and mocked. "You really don't give up your evil intentions." Lu Dongyu did not speak, and her charming face with light makeup was directly lowered. "I see." Military counselor gently stroked Lu Dongyu's hair and said indifferently, "Since you know my identity, then you must understand that from today on, I am not your master. Tianlan is." Lu Dongyu's movement paused, and then she tried harder to move up and down. "Your skills are getting better and better. No wonder Gu Hanshan likes you," military counselor said with a chuckle and then said, "In addition, please tell your grandfather that what I said to you is equally valid for the whole Lu family. He's getting old, and I'm afraid he's confused. How dare he ask me to rob Tianlan's Imperial Jade Seal? I'm afraid he's delusional. Grandfather doesn't know your identity, Your Excellency." Lu Dongyu raised her head, and her eyes were blurred. Military counselor pressed Lu Dongyu's head down and said indifferently, "It doesn't matter. A dog must be a likable dog. Only when it is loyal can it be likable. His messy thoughts can be put away. From today on there is only one master of your Lu family, not me but Li Tianlan." Lu Dongyu nodded, but it brought military counselor a more comfortable experience. Military counselor turned to look out of the window. Under the cloak, his eyes were deep and calm. No matter what happened in the future, Samsara Palace would not separate from Li Tianlan. But Li Tianlan's actions against the Lu family, military counselor suddenly had a headache. The plan was messed up after all, but fortunately, there was still time to repair it. He looked at the young woman who knelt at his feet and fawned on him, thinking that it was not a big problem to let the Lu family come out from the dark. Li Tianlan did not go to the Sky Academy, but asked Tribulation to go to a park near the Sky Academy. Tribulation, who was pale, arrived as scheduled. Looking at the long sword on Li Tianlan's back and the golden retriever lying at his feet, he raised his eyebrows slightly and seemed puzzled. "How is Marshal Uncle's injury?" Li Tianlan looked at Tribulation and asked straightforwardly without any nonsense. Tribulation narrowed his eyes and was silent for a while. Then he laughed at himself and said, "Not very optimistic. Too much of a burden on your body?" Li Tianlan frowned. He was the young governor of Sai City. If he became successful in the future, he could not directly turn Sai City into the Li family. But it did not mean that Sai City was not important to him. At least until now, Sai City was still his most reliable protection. The state of tribulation and Situt Songyue was most directly related to Li Tianlan's interests and the foundation of his future survival. He took out the imperial jade seal that he had prepared and handed it to Tribulation. He said softly, "This thing should play a role, but how to use it, Martial Uncle needs to study it yourself. To be honest, although I came back to life with luck, I am not very clear about the function of this thing." Tribulation took the imperial jade seal and glanced at it. He raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Martial arts stone? It's the imperial jade seal." Li Tianlan explained. Tribulation's breathing suddenly became heavy. He knew about the imperial jade seal, but the ancient jade in front of him was the most precious martial art stone for martial artists. If he could get it in advance, how could his breakthrough be like this? "Thank you." Tribulation was silent for a while. Then he held the imperial jade seal tightly in his hand and said seriously, "It's good that it's useful to Martial Uncle." Li Tianlan smiled and waved his hand. "I'm going to leave Huading for a walk. I'm afraid that I won't be able to see Martial Uncle for a while, so I came to say goodbye to you." Tribulation glanced at Li Tianlan and frowned. "Temporarily?" Before Li Tianlan could speak, he nodded again and said, "It's good to temporarily take a step back. The special warfare system will be established in the southeast region of Zhongzhou State, and the Southeast Special Warfare Headquarters will be established." Li Tianlan nodded and asked subconsciously, "Who's minister?" Although he knew it was unlikely to be Tribulation, he still hoped to hear a different answer. But the answer Tribulation gave was in line with the norm. "If I'm not mistaken, it should be Zhang Qi." Zhang Qi, the director of Wuyue Special Operations Bureau. Wuyue was the core territory of the Southeast Group. Zhang Qi's strength was higher than that of the directors of the Special Operations Bureau around him. He was a real superior of the half-step invincible realm. For him to take this position, he had enough strength and experience. But the Southeast Group would get the result of this pilot. Was the Wang family of Beihai so eager to stand on the front line against him? He's just a transitional figure. Tribulation said. The Southeast Group got this position. It won't take long for them to trade with Kunlun City. But no matter how they trade, it's hard for us to get it. It's good to temporarily take a step back. Li Tianlan nodded, stood up and said, "After I leave, if Martial Uncle is still in Huating, please take care of East Emperor Palace if there are any problems in the future." "Don't worry." Tribulation nodded and said, "Even if I leave, Sai City will send someone else to take care of it." He looked at Li Tianlan and asked directly, "Where are you going?" "I haven't decided yet." Li Tianlan shook his head and said, "Just walk around, all the way south or north. Maybe one day I'll go directly to Mount Taibai." A stiff smile appeared on Tribulation's pale face. "If you need it, go there directly. Sai City will arrange everything for you." Li Tianlan nodded and turned to leave. The golden retriever followed behind him happily. He passed the grass and the flower beds. Standing at the gate of the park, Li Tianlan turned back and looked back. Tribulation still stayed where he was, watching him quietly. Li Tianlan waved his hand, turned around and walked away. Thunder sounded in the air. The autumn rain, which had been brewing for a long time, began to fall. Li Tianlan's figure gradually became blurred in the rain, going farther and farther. A man, a sword, and a dog. Chapter 280. The autumn rain blurred the green water and the Tsang Mountain. The rain continued to fall, lingering in the air. Dark clouds gathered from the north to the south, and the rain kept falling, with frosty coldness and bleakness. Lonely Mountain was the most beautiful in the rain. Westlake was also the most beautiful in the rain. The old man with gray hair, dressed in cotton clothes, was sitting at the junction of mountains and rivers, fishing with a homemade fishing rod. The Mid-Autumn Festival had passed. There was still green on Lonely Mountain, but the withered yellow was gradually spreading. The old man seemed to be sitting between life and death, and his back looked lonely and lonely. The autumn rain was still falling, wetting the Tsang Mountain and the green water, which was poignant and beautiful. It was poetic and picturesque. A black umbrella appeared on the mountain road covered with flowers and leaves. The black umbrella was bathed in the rain and walked down the mountain. A woman in simple and plain clothes, but with a very beautiful appearance, walked behind the old man with an umbrella. The woman's appearance was very beautiful, but there was a kind of vicissitudes and fatigue in her eyes. She was not young, but a little haggard look could not hide the stubbornness between her eyebrows, which was an instinctive persistence. Such a woman was the most beautiful. Even if she was in her twilight years, she was still as beautiful as before. The woman took a step forward and held the umbrella over the old man's head, shielding him from the dense rain. The old man didn't seem to notice it. He just looked at the water attentively and said nothing. The woman was also silent, standing behind the old man with an umbrella, like a statue. There was silence between heaven and earth. Time passed. The fishing rod in the old man's hand trembled uncontrollably with his palm, and then there were ripples on the water surface. The woman behind him looked quietly at the old man's uncontrollably trembling hand. Her eyes were sad, and she couldn't help sighing softly. The old man seemed to notice that there was one more person behind him. He looked at the umbrella above his head, pointed with the other hand, and said with a smile, "It's meaningless. I don't need this thing." He really didn't need it. No matter how heavy the rain was, as long as he wanted, wherever he went, there would be a clear sky. He was fearless of wind and rain, and invincible to all enemies. Just because his name was Li Honghe. "It's meaningless for you to fish here," the woman said softly, "because you can't catch fish at all." Li Honghe didn't mind the woman's tone and said with a smile, "We will have guests later. If I can put the fish I caught on the table, it will be my sincerity. I won't lose anything by trying." "He doesn't like your fish." The woman's tone was crisp and clear. "But the only thing I can satisfy him is fish," Li Honghe said calmly. When the woman heard this, her originally tense expression immediately relaxed a little, but she didn't say anything. No one knew if Li Honghe saw the expression of the woman behind him. He looked at the lake and suddenly said, "You don't like Zhongzhou State." The woman was silent for a moment, then softly said, "I'm tired. It wasn't that she didn't like it. She used to love it, but she was really tired now." Li Honghe smiled self-deprecatingly and said in a complicated tone, "It's the Li family that let you down. But I can't afford it." "What is letting him down?" The woman said calmly. "It is Zhongzhou State that failed the Li family." Li Honghe didn't say anything. He was not qualified to say anything about this issue. He was really not qualified. "It seems that I was wrong to let Li Huaxing take Wangxing away," Li Honghe said softly. "Wangxing has now become the new Major General of Spirit Tortoise in Zhongzhou State. I thought you would be happy. Now I think about it, Qingye, you will blame me, right?" Li Wangxing. The cold light in the corners of Qingye's eyes suddenly softened. She was Li Wangxing's mother. For her, her son was the real everything. He still has a future, and he can help the young master and the Li family. "Your Highness made a good arrangement." "I'm very grateful," Qingye said softly. She used to be an extraordinary woman in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, but with the passage of time, this former female general seemed to have lost her edge in the past. "What about you?" Li Honghe suddenly asked. "What do you want?" Qingye looked silent, and didn't speak for a long time. I suddenly remembered the motto of the Sky Academy, which I mentioned in person back then. "If you want to go to heaven, you must go to hell first." "Qingye, the Li family can give you freedom now. Do you want to go to hell?" Li Honghe asked softly. The Li family had never seen heaven, whether in its glory or in its decline, but it had seen hell. There was freedom everywhere in hell. If death was freedom, Qingye smiled and said calmly, "I don't want to die." She didn't want to die, nor did she want to face it. Li Honghe nodded and said, "Then let others die." "Leng Xiao is good. Han Chuan is also good." Qingye recommended 2 people. These 2 people were now in Lonely Mountain. They had been with Li Honghe for nearly 20 years. They were loyal and had faced countless open and hidden attacks in the cold rain. Li Honghe nodded and said calmly, "Then let them be. I'll arrange it." Qingye nodded. The drizzling rain was still flying in the air. The wind stopped, and the rain suddenly became heavier. The sky was gloomy, and the mountains gradually filled with a vast expanse of white. It began to fog. The fine white mist drifted between the mountains and rivers, making them hazy. After getting the answer he wanted, Qingye turned and left. A lone boat appeared on the water in the distance. A middle-aged man, who was well known in Zhongzhou State and appeared on the news broadcast almost every year, stood at the bow of the boat with a dignified appearance. The president of Zhongzhou State, Li Huaqing. Qingye turned around to look, and his eyes were filled with indifference. The whole lonely mountain seemed to be glorious when the president visited. Li Honghe had said that all he could give Li Huaqing was fish. Now it seemed that he couldn't even give him fish. She turned around and left without saying a word. Li Honghe also stood up and looked at Li Huaqing, who came ashore in front of him. The old man smiled kindly and said softly, "Welcome, President." Li Huaqing, who looked high-spirited but had a serious look in his eyes, waved his hand and said with a smile, "You're too polite, Senior Li. The weather is bad, so you should rest more on the mountain. It doesn't matter if I get caught in the rain occasionally." Li Honghe reached out and pulled Li Honghe ashore. The heat rose around him. With him as the center, the rain within a radius of tens of meters was completely evaporated in an instant. Lonely Mountain is not a barren place, but there are not many resources it can offer. I plan to entertain you by fishing in person, but the weather is too bad, and the fish don't give me face, so I can only simplify everything. Li Honghe said with a smile. Li Huaqing was slightly stunned. Although the other party's tone was calm, he still heard a hint of rejection from the other party's tone. Although he didn't understand the meaning, it seemed to be enough to show Li Honghe's true attitude towards his visit today. Li Huaqing frowned. He didn't want to get to the point too quickly, but Li Honghe's meaning was somewhat clear. He had to tentatively say with a smile, "Everything is fine, Senior Li. What's worth my visit is not only the food." Li Honghe smiled and didn't say much. Li Huaqing's heart sank slightly again. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Honghe, who was still fishing beside him. He said softly, "I have something to report to Senior Li. Tianlan left Huiting 2 days ago. He said he was going for a walk, but he didn't say where he was going." Li Honghe raised his eyebrows and turned to take a deep look at Li Huaqing. "That's a good step back," he said softly. He knew a series of things in the outside world. Even if he didn't want to know, at this time he was in Lin, and some people with intentions would try to send him information. But in this situation it was really good for Li Tianlan to take a step back. It's simply wonderful. Li Huaqing looked sincere and admiring. "Yes." Li Honghe laughed. He went out for a few months. Although he suffered some setbacks, it seems to be a good thing. At least he has matured a little. The future of the Li family ultimately depends on him, not me. Here it came. Li Huaqing's heart tightened, but he remained calm and respectfully said, "But the Li family still belongs to Senior Li." "Wrong," Li Honghe said quietly. "The Li family only lives for itself now, so the Li family belongs to each of us. Maybe it will be Tianlan's in the future, but now it's not his or mine." Li Huaqing felt a little bitter at the corner of his mouth. He tried to smile and said, "I understand what you mean and your decision, but Tianlan is still young, and no one knows where he is now. The Li family still needs you to take charge of the overall situation. Don't you understand, Huaqing?" Li Honghe sighed softly. After the border war, the Li family no longer pursues the overall situation but freedom. I know your difficulties, but today's Li family is not what it was 20 years ago. Now we need Tianlan to be responsible for the Li family, and I only need to be responsible for my grandson. He did understand Li Huaqing's difficulties. Li Huaqing treated people with generosity, and his actions could be regarded as upright. Since he had been promoted, he had pursued fairness in many sensitive personnel issues, and he did not have too deep a grudge against the major groups. The academics had risen quickly, but its foundation was shallow. Li Huaqing's actions were entirely because he wanted to leave enough living space for the academics after he retired. So from another perspective, the weakness of the academics today had a direct relationship with their shallow foundation and Li Huaqing's style of doing things. But he did not want the academics to be weak all the time. What he hoped was to grasp some things in the dark when he gave up some things on the surface, so as to make up for some shortcomings of the academic's own political structure. For example, the special warfare system. The academics could have expected Li Tianlan's growth, but the cooperation between Gu Xingyun and the Wang family of Beihai forced Li Huaqing to speed up his plan. The special warfare system needed experts. The Li family was Li Huaqing's only choice now. Li Honghe actually didn't know what Li Huaqing was going to do with the Li family, and he didn't want to know. As he said, the only thing he could give Li Huaqing was this fish that he didn't know whether he could take the bait or not. At least, he would no longer carry the Li family to go to the mountains of knives and seas of fire under the encouragement of the so-called overall situation. That was Li Tianlan's business. Your grandson? Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and suddenly asked in a playful tone. Li Honghe was a little confused. Old Li, I've inadvertently found out about some things. Today, I've come here to verify it. Li Huaqing asked softly. Do you know Secretary Bai Qingqian? The girl of the Bai family? Yes. Li Honghe nodded. Dongqing Wudi and Bai Qingqian were recognized as talented and beautiful in the eyes of countless people. They loved each other very much, but I don't know why their relationship became very bad later. I accidentally learned that all this should have started when Bai Qingqian gave birth to Dongqing Rushi. Dongqing Rushi can't be the reason why Bai Qingqian turned against the Dongqing clan. Then what on earth caused Bai Qingqian to break up with the Dongqing clan? Why? Li Honghe asked quietly. Because of maternal love. Li Huaqing stared at Li Honghe. After what happened that year, I heard that Senior Li just had a granddaughter who died young. I didn't know you had a grandson. On the contrary, we all ignored Dongqing Rushi, who was born at the same time as Tianlan. Senior Li, do you really have a grandson? Bai Qingqian is now in Guangdong. To be honest, that's where I used to work, so I still have some influence in Guangdong. Li Huaqing said slowly. A few months ago, when the news of Tianlan's death reached Zhongzhou State, Dongqing Wudi went to Guangdong as soon as possible. He stayed there for 3 days in a row, but he didn't see Bai Qingqian. Later, he seemed to have seen her, and it was said that he was slapped. When I heard the news, I vaguely sorted out some clues and roughly guessed why Bai Qingqian turned against the Dongqing clan. There's no other reason that we can't see, Li Huaqing said softly. It's because of the child. Bai Qingqian's hatred for the Dongqing clan is just because she is a mother who lost her child. Dongqing Rushi is not Bai Qingqian's daughter. Li Tianlan is the son of Bai Qingqian and Dongqing Wudi. Senior Li, Dongqing Rushi is your granddaughter. Am I right? No. Li Honghe smiled. His expression didn't change at all. There was only calmness and naturalness. I really have nothing to do with Dongqing Rushi, he said softly. His tone was not forced naturalness at all. Li Huaqing's speculation was very reasonable, but whether he believed it or not. Chapter 281. Autumn was about to pass. Early winter was coming. Heaven Capital welcomed the first snow of the year. Snowflakes were falling in the late night and the morning. They were neither too big nor too small, but they seemed to be never-ending. The cold east wind roared in every corner of Changdao. The snow fell silently, and the world was white. The airport of Heaven Capital was still in operation. Daybreak, who entered the airport through the VIP passage, got out of the car and looked up at the flying snow in the air with soft eyes. He was dressed in white. The ground was covered with snow. It was a very cold but warm picture. The planes in the airport took off and landed with scenes of gathering and dispersing. The pickup bus shuttled back and forth. Daybreak, dressed in white, stood quietly like a statue. 11 o'clock in the morning. The wind and snow were stronger. A loud roar sounded in the air. A silver-gray private plane slowly landed on the runway that had just been cleared. Daybreak, who was covered with snow, moved and took a step forward. A cold and dreamy young figure slowly walked down the gangway. The woman wore a black coat and faced the wind and snow of Heaven Capital without any makeup. She was delicate and indifferent. She was colder than the cold wind. She was more beautiful than the falling snow. Daybreak's eyes were in a trance. Then he smiled and said softly, "Boss Qin, welcome to Heaven Capital." Heaven Capital is a good name. Qin Weibai walked down the gangway and said softly as her high heels stepped on the snow. Daybreak smiled without saying a word. He reached out and made a please gesture. Flaming Fire, who was behind Qin Weibai, had already walked a few steps forward and opened the door for her. Qin Weibai got into the car. The black car was driving in the snow-covered heaven capital. Qin Weibai looked at the falling snow outside the window and suddenly said, "How is your highness doing recently?" "I'm in a good mood. I've been busy with the internal affairs of East Island recently. There are too many things to do, so I can't come to pick you up in person," Daybreak said with a polite smile. "But your highness has already held a banquet to welcome Boss Qin in Wangtian Pavilion." Like Heaven Capital, Sky-Reaching Pavilion was also a new name. It was located in the center of Heaven Capital and used to be a hotel. It could be said to be the tallest building in Heaven Capital. After the appearance of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, Changdao was renamed Heaven Capital. The tallest hotel in Changdao became the temporary headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and was renamed Sky-Reaching Pavilion. Deity of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, who ranked second on the divine list, now lived on the top floor of Sky-Reaching Pavilion. Qin Weibai said nothing more. She kept staring out of the window. She looked tired and weak. The car drove through the silent atmosphere, all the way to Wangtian Pavilion. Daybreak didn't get off the car. He just turned his head apologetically and said softly, "Boss Qin, I'm sorry. I have something to deal with. His Highness is waiting for you upstairs. I'll arrange someone to take you upstairs." Qin Weibai nodded noncommittally and got out of the car with Flaming Fire. The Daybreak car turned around and rushed out at a faster speed than when it came, heading straight for the airport again. The engine roared in the snowstorm. Daybreak's hand holding the steering wheel trembled slightly. He was extremely beautiful. His handsome face, which was somewhat devilishly handsome, seemed to have completely soared. Even his eyes were no longer cold and gloomy, but sharp and bright. The car rushed straight to the airport at a speed that was almost flying. A passenger plane flying from overseas to Heaven Capital had landed at the airport 20 minutes ago. Two middle-aged men, who looked extremely simple, were standing at the pickup gate. The two of them were dressed in plain cloth clothes and cloth shoes. Overall, they gave off a sense of dullness that was incompatible with Heaven Capital. However, their expressions were still calm. Seeing that no one came to pick them up, they were not in a hurry. They just stood there silently. Daybreak rushed into the airport pickup hall. He immediately found the two plain men, who were being stared at by all kinds of gazes. This was the first time they met after many years. Daybreak's body was stiff on the spot. He was trembling with excitement, but he did not dare to go forward for a while. The two middle-aged men, who were waiting silently, also noticed Daybreak's handsome and enchanting face at the first time. They didn't know this face, but the look in his eyes was somewhat familiar. The two of them frowned. Daybreak had walked over quickly and hugged the two of them tightly. "Welcome." He tried to calm himself down, but the hands holding the two of them were getting closer and closer. "Welcome back, brother." Skyview Pavilion was 68 stories high, shaped like a pyramid. It used to be the most distinctive building in Heaven Capital, and now it had become the most powerful building in Heaven Capital. An elite of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital respectfully led Qin Weibai and Flaming Fire into the elevator. The elevator stopped on the 66th floor. There were no elevators on the upper two floors, but spiral stairs. Anyone who arrived here had to walk up. The elite of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital did not move forward, but bowed and made a gesture of invitation to Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai looked around. Skyview Pavilion on the 66th floor was surrounded by glass. The glass was hard, stable, and transparent. Standing in any corner on the 66th floor, one could enjoy the beautiful scenery of the entire Heaven Capital from a high vantage point. It was snowing in Heaven Capital. The snow fell from above. Standing on a high vantage point, and looking at the fluttering snowflakes, Qin Weibai suddenly felt a little lonely. This was a natural emotion when standing on a high vantage point. It was lonely at the top. Qin Weibai stopped for a moment, and then stepped on the stairs to go up. The scenery here was beautiful. This place was very high, but she didn't like it when someone stood higher than her. The spiral stairs were higher. Stepping up was like climbing a ladder to heaven. Qin Weibai took flaming fire step by step and finally climbed to the 68th floor. Because of the structure, the 68th floor was smaller than the lower floor, but it was more exquisite. There was only a crystal tea table in the whole space, surrounded by a carpet, and there was nothing else. It was so simple, and it seemed to prove that the owner of this place was extremely rich and powerful. A man in casual clothes stood in front of the French window with his back to Qin Weibai, motionless and admiring the snow outside the window. Qin Weibai looked at the back in front of her calmly. Flaming Fire, who was beside her, turned her head after a glance. She was the super master of Samsara, a high-end combat force in the dark world. But every time she saw deity, Flaming Fire was afraid. It was an instinctive fear. The other party was so ordinary, but he stood there so real. He looked inconspicuous, but people could not help but ignore everything around him. Real. It was hard for Flaming Fire to describe this temperament. But now deity stood there, ordinary but real, which made her subconsciously ignore the two men standing on both sides of him. Two men who should never be ignored in East Island. Luxing Songquan, the master of Jifeng Sword Raining School. Tianhai Wuji, the master of Wuji Palace. The two great grandmasters of East Island were romantic, but at this time, standing beside the ordinary and real deity, they were like two statues. Flaming Fire's scalp was a little numb, and the fear in her heart almost showed on her face involuntarily. Qin Weibai stepped forward. She walked past the blanket beside the tea table. Her high-heeled shoes stepped on the wooden floor, making a crisp sound. Deity turned around, and there was an ordinary and easygoing smile in the corner of his eyes. The heater on the top floor was turned on. Qin Weibai unbuttoned her coat and handed it to Flaming Fire. Flaming Fire took the coat and put it in her hand, and her heart gradually calmed down. Weibai pays respect to your highness. Qin Weibai slightly bowed and said in a light tone. Under the coat, Qin Weibai wore a dark blue embroidered cheongsam. The cheongsam fit her well, and it set off her snow-white calves. Elegant, reserved, cold, and graceful. What was just right was perfection. Deity looked at Qin Weibai with undisguised appreciation in his eyes. For most of his life, he had seen too many so-called beauties, but compared with Qin Weibai in front of him, most of them were mediocre. She was fairy-like and peerless. She was indeed a perfect woman who could topple a country. The fire in the eyes of Tianhai Wuji, the master of Wuji Palace, flashed away. Even Luxing Songquan, who was known as the Sword Sage, flashed a trace of fire in his eyes. You go down. Deity waved his hand and casually gave an order. Luxing Songquan and Tianhai Wuji froze at the same time. After a moment of silence, the two went downstairs directly without saying a word. Your Highness is really domineering. Qin Weibai chuckled, and it was hard to tell whether her tone was sarcasm or appreciation. Deity glanced at her with a smile and said slowly, You know the inside story, so why are you sarcastic to me? Qin Weibai smiled and said no more. The dark world had calmed down now, but there was drama in all countries. It was the reform of the special warfare system in Zhongzhou State. In East Island, it was the collision between the rising purgatory of Heaven Capital, Wuji Palace, and Jifeng Sword Raining School. Deity was now the only giant in the special warfare system of East Island, and all sides recognized his status. But Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Raining School were not willing to let Deity take away too much of their interests. The two were loyal to the Mikado. As long as they did not violate the rules, 9 out of 10 of the orders of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital were obeying them on the surface, but secretly disobeying them. Now the 3 invincible realm experts of East Island were fighting openly and secretly. The reason why Luxing Songquan and Tianhai Wuji could retreat without resistance didn't mean that they really submitted to the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. They just followed the rules on the surface. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital is developing very fast in East Island. It accepted the team of Liuhua Palace, and can reach such a scale in a short time. Your Highness deserves the congratulations of Samsara Palace. Qin Weibai said softly. It's developing well. Deity nodded, turned around, reached out his hand, and pointed at Heaven Capital outside the window. How about my country? Qin Weibai looked at the snow outside the window. After a moment of silence she said lightly, Your Highness's country is falling snow. It's sad but not magnificent. She paused and said with a smile, but it seems that Your Highness is very satisfied with the current situation. Of course I'm not satisfied. Deity turned around calmly. If I were satisfied, I wouldn't have let you appear here today. Your Highness still has ambitions. Qin Weibai asked softly. Zhongzhou State. Deity was silent for a long time before he slowly spat out 2 words. His eyes were a little cold. He came from Zhongzhou State. But he was abandoned by Zhongzhou State like a wild dog. How humiliating was that? No matter how glorious the purgatory of heaven capital was, it couldn't spread its tentacles to Zhongzhou State, and he couldn't let it go. The Wang family of Beihai is very strong. Kunlun City is also very strong. Qin Weibai said with a smile. Deity nodded frankly and acknowledged this fact. He looked at Qin Weibai and said seriously, so you don't think there's a chance? There is a chance. But it's not a good opportunity now. Qin Weibai looked at the plain white outside the window, and her tone was calm and composed. This woman, who was less than 25 years old this year, stood in front of Deity, one of the strongest in the dark world. She participated in the general trend, promoted the general trend, and planned the general trend, but she didn't feel the slightest bit out of place. What was I doing when I was 24 or 25 years old? Deity thought silently. When he was 24 or 25 years old, he was still busy making progress in the thundershocking realm. He shook his head in self-mockery. Thinking of the recent situation in Zhongzhou State, he said with a smile, "What do you think of the recent changes in Zhongzhou State?" Qin Weibai was silent for a moment and said, "The internal problems of the Wang family of Beihai can't be suppressed anymore." Are you sure? Deity's eyes narrowed. This is an inevitable process in law. The Wang family of Beihai is the same as the Li family in the past. They will always come to a period where they have to seek change. If they succeed, they will have a bright future. If they fail, they will be doomed eternally. The Wang family of Beihai has experienced this period. Now it's just another reincarnation. Qin Weibai said softly, but this time it's different. When the Wang family of Beihai goes through this period, there will be no Li family around to shelter them from the wind and rain. On the contrary, they have Kunlun City around them. They asked for it. Deity's tone was cold and mocking. My speculation is the same as yours. Zhang Qi became the first minister of the Southeast Special Warfare Headquarters. Even if Kunlun City gives him a place to enter the decision-making committee, it will not be for nothing. Maybe it's a bait. Zhang Qi is the confidant of Wu Yue, isn't he? That person is a big favorite in the next session. If everything goes well, 5 or 6 years later, is that time the good opportunity you mentioned? Qin Weibai shook her head. Maybe not. Your Highness, don't underestimate Wang Tianzong. You should know him better than I do. He must also know the meaning of Zhang Qi's promotion. But he let everything go. Maybe he has long been prepared. No preparation is omnipotent. Deity was silent for a while and said indifferently, wasn't the Li family prepared in the past? If the Li family hadn't been prepared, maybe they wouldn't even have the chance to stay dormant now. Qin Weibai said indifferently, Your Highness, if you want the purgatory of heaven capital to enter Zhongzhou State, the Samsara Palace can help you. But now the Samsara Palace needs your help. This is part of our cooperation. At least in the matter of you entering Zhongzhou State, a strong samsara is good for you. I think it's enough now. Deity said with a smile. The purgatory of heaven capital can barely block the Wang family of Beihai now. The Samsara Palace can block Kunlun City. Gu Xingyun is no match for the Palace Master. And the purgatory of heaven capital will continue to develop. He didn't want to continue, because Qin Weibai was looking at him. It was a pair of eyes as bright as the Milky Way. With a smile, she was quiet. But under such a gaze, Deity felt like an idiot. First, I believe you can block Wang Tianzong. But can the purgatory of heaven capital block the Wang family of Beihai? Even if it's barely, it's also a joke. Second, the Palace Master defeated Gu Xingyun unexpectedly that day. If we fight to the death again, I don't know why Your Highness has so much confidence in the Palace Master. Third, She looked at Deity and finally stopped hiding her emotions. She said coldly, "Who told you that Gu Xingyun is the strongest in Kunlun City? Your Highness, do you really think I'm an idiot?" Deity narrowed his eyes. His ordinary face suddenly looked extremely sharp and gloomy. "You really know a lot." He looked at Qin Weibai and said in a meaningful tone, "I know everything." Qin Weibai's eyes were in a trance. She said softly, "Your Highness, cooperation requires sincerity. You're very strong, but your current ambition might completely destroy you." Deity laughed and said non-committally, "What does the Samsara Palace want?" "The foundation." Qin Weibai said, "The Samsara Palace has its own foundation. Just like the purgatory of Heaven Capital in Heaven Capital." Deity was not surprised by the answer. He nodded. "Do you have a goal? Where is it?" "Snow Country." Chapter 282. The so-called foundation was the foundation for the survival of any force. For example, the Beihai province of the Wang family of Beihai. For example, Heaven Capital of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. For example, Star State of the Fantasy World. This was the strongest fortress of all the superpowers. The foundation meant resources, wealth, and rules that could be constantly cycled and perfected internally. In a sense, these could be said to be power. The superpowers in the dark world might not have an invincible realm expert in a special period, but their real base camp would always be as stable as Mount Tai. This was also the reason why the Samsara Palace had been excluded from the superpowers. The Master of Samsara Palace. The murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld. The 12 Super Masters of Samsara. In terms of strength, the Samsara Palace was definitely not weak, but they had no foundation. Everyone, even any country, treated them very politely. This situation seemed prosperous, but once the Master of Samsara Palace died, everything would completely disappear. Because they rose too fast, they were not mature enough internally, and they lacked strong support in the rear. But this situation was completely different for other forces. If Wang Tianzong suddenly died, any force in the dark world could not easily annex the Wang family of Beihai. At least Zhongzhou State would desperately protect Beihai province. Such support was what the Samsara Palace did not have, and it was what they had been pursuing. Deity was not surprised that Qin Weibai and the Samsara Palace wanted what they wanted, but he did not expect that the other party would have such a big appetite. Snow Country. The Polar Ground Alliance. Deity narrowed his eyes and looked at Qin Weibai seriously, as if he wanted to see through her completely. Qin Weibai's eyes were indifferent and sharp, and finally became soft quietly. "What do you think, Your Highness?" Qin Weibai smiled and asked softly, "Your appetite is too big. I'm afraid you can't swallow it." Deity said slowly, "It's not difficult to seek victory in chaos and fish in troubled waters. It's just a foundation." Qin Weibai said calmly. She wore a dark blue cheongsam and stood in front of Deity, but she always had her own light and style. Deity's aura was ordinary and real, but Qin Weibai only had pure strength. It was not the strength of force, but the light of wisdom, calmness, and confidence. The appreciation in Deity's eyes became more obvious. "Are you sure it's Snow Country?" he asked with interest. "I think you know what it means to attack the Polar Ground Alliance. Are you sure?" "Not at the moment. But we have time, we can slowly plan." Qin Weibai took the warm water that Flaming Fire handed to her and took a sip. She quietly looked at the snow outside the window. Deity was still looking at Qin Weibai. His eyes were filled with admiration and vigilance. He suddenly thought of the scenes when Zhongzhou State plotted against East Island. When did Zhongzhou State start to plot against East Island? In Deity's view, it wasn't the time for the elites of Zhongzhou State to arrive at Changdao. Instead, it was before. He still had to move forward. To be exact, it was when the Master of Samsara Palace destroyed Night Spirit, went against Wang Tianzong, and challenged Gu Xingyun. The Master of Samsara Palace fought against the God of War of Zhongzhou State. The impact was huge. As the neighbor of Zhongzhou State, East Island would definitely send someone to watch the ceremony and observe the strength of Gu Xingyun and the Master of Samsara Palace. An invincible realm expert was naturally not very safe. He might be killed by Zhongzhou State. So East Island simply sent 2 superiors of the invincible realm. At the same time, East Island saw the opportunity. Once the master of Samsara Palace and Gu Xingyan were both injured, Zhongzhou State would almost become the immediate interest of East Island. So before the 2 grandmasters of the invincible realm set off, a large number of elites of East Island sneaked into Zhongzhou State, which directly led to the weakness of East Island's local forces. And because of this, Zhongzhou State had the perfect precondition to plot against East Island. During that time, everyone thought that Samsara Palace was declaring force and trying to seek its own foundation. Zhongzhou State plotted against East Island, and many people interpreted that East Island was the target of Samsara Palace. Samsara Palace seemed to acquiesce to this statement. But in fact, the target of Samsara Palace was not East Island at all, but the Purgatory of Heaven capital. In this battle, the biggest goal of Samsara Palace was to become the Purgatory of Heaven capital. There were too many possibilities in the last few days of the 7-day agreement of Changdao. What really determined the final result was not Li Tianlan entering the invincible realm. It was not the sword between Wang Tianzong and Deity. It was the 5th day before the final battle, when Wang Tianzong dealt with the border battle, and the 5 superiors of the invincible realm who were trapped in Huading broke out of the encirclement. The master of Samsara Palace stood by and did nothing. This was the key of the key. Although the master of Samsara Palace was seriously injured at that time, she at least had the power to make a blow. With her strength, it was enough to completely suppress at least one superior of the invincible realm. In that case, the 5 superiors could not rush out of Huading. East Island would be in an extremely weak position. Zhongzhou State and the 5 superpowers would first join hands to destroy the special warfare system of East Island. Then, in the real final battle, there would be the Heaven Punishment Troop of the Wang family of Beihai. Samsara Palace would help Zhongzhou State. Even if the Purgatory of Heaven capital appeared, in that situation, Deity could not stop the attack of the Wang family of Beihai, Zhongzhou State, and the 5 superpowers. But that night, the master of Samsara Palace, who still had the power to make a blow, did not make a move, which directly led to the almost inevitable reversal of the Battle of Changdao. This plan was too sophisticated. The blow of the master of Samsara Palace was the most important. Samsara Palace deliberately made an accident, which directly led to the rise of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, and the fiasco of Zhongzhou State. Deity looked at Qin Weibai in front of him. His mind flew farther and farther away. After everything was settled, he heard from daybreak that Saint had told him personally that the master of Samsara Palace had already used that strike. But Deity still did not know where the blow landed. And Deity also knew that the master of Samsara Palace was just an executor of such a huge plan with Zhongzhou State to plot against East Island. The military counselor was the so-called military counselor, who was pushed out. The one who really controlled everything behind the scenes was actually the beautiful young woman in front of him. She needed the rise of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. She needed the war on the border of Zhongzhou State. She needed Li Tianlan to be a hero. She needed Li Tianlan to make a big breakthrough. Everything happened without the slightest accident. It was as if everything had been prepared in advance, and it happened step by step in a prescribed order. Deity's body seemed to be infected by the howling wind and snow outside the window. It was a little cold. Because up to this point, this plan was actually only half a step forward. Deity did not see that such a plan would benefit the Samsara Palace. Instead, Zhongzhou State had now regarded the Samsara Palace as a hostile force. On the contrary, the Samsara Palace betrayed Zhongzhou State and helped the Purgatory of Heaven capital. And the rise of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, to some extent, was beneficial to Li Tianlan. But it was only beneficial to him. The so-called pursuit of the foundation of the Samsara Palace, at least in the Battle of Changdao, was a cover or even a joke. They just wanted to help. And this time, Qin Weibai's plot against Snow Country also needed a foundation. But this time, who knew if she really needed it or if she also wanted to help? Deity took a deep breath. In his sight, Qin Weibai stood in front of him, with a faint smile. Gentle, tranquil, cold, with dreamlike perfection. But Deity suddenly felt crazy. Under this perfect appearance, there seemed to be a crazy burning fire, beating fiercely and vigorously, blooming the most dazzling light in the dark world. When are you going to do it? Deity asked. It depends on the speed of your highness's development in East Island. Qin Weibai's tone was soft. It will take at least 2 or 3 years. During this period, the Purgatory of Heaven capital should be able to suppress Jifeng Sword Reigning School and Wuji Palace, and then give the Samsara Palace the greatest support. Now the Purgatory of Heaven capital had the full support of the Mikado, and Heaven capital had gradually become the center of the special warfare system of East Island. The strength of deity was also there. East Island was still in a sensitive period of turmoil. The right time, the right place, and the right people. Deity occupied extremely favorable conditions. In 2 or 3 years, it was enough for him to completely rise in East Island. Why Snow Country? There was a trace of unpredictable emotion in Deity's tone. To be exact, it's the Polar Ground Alliance. Qin Weibai said with a smile. This force is too powerful, and also too bloated. They are the Alliance, the guardian of Eastern Europe, not just the guardian of Snow Country. This is an opportunity for me. She took a step forward, and the high-heeled shoes hit the floor crisply. I will set off for Snow Country in a while. The scenery of Snow Country in the next few years may be very beautiful. Her eyes were as bright as the morning glow. The situation in Snow Country is very complicated. There is the Polar Ground Alliance, but don't forget the Wang family of Beihai. Some of the spies of the Wang family of Beihai in Snow Country are also very terrible. Are you sure that they won't notice? Deity shook his head, and his tone was not optimistic. So I need your highness to help me. It's good to temporarily attract their attention. Qin Weibai said, when I am in Snow Country, your highness can try to enter Zhongzhou state. Looking at Deity's frown, she paused and continued. Of course not inside Zhongzhou state, but the border. The border of Nanyun. Deity raised his eyebrows thoughtfully. In the border war, the Border Control Corps rushed into Annan State and drove 800 miles. That land is enough to be a small province. Zhongzhou State will definitely not return it to Annan State, but now it is not good to occupy it openly. It is just in the name of helping Annan State to suppress the rebellion. It is very good and has unlimited potential. If your highness doesn't take action, it will belong to the Wang family of Beihai in the future. Qin Weibai said softly. Deity thought for a moment, nodded and said, okay. We must send absolutely reliable people. Who do you want to go, your highness? Daybreak? Dawn? Phoenix? Qin Weibai asked calmly. Deity laughed and waved his hand with great pride. The 3 of them are really good. But Boss Qin, don't underestimate the Purgatory of Heaven capital. I have thousands of people who can be used. Qin Weibai lowered her head and said, oh. In a corner that Deity could not see, her eyes were crystal clear, shining and happy. In that case, your highness, I'm leaving. Qin Weibai glanced at Deity and turned to leave. Where is Li Tianlan now? Deity suddenly asked. Qin Weibai was stunned. I don't know. She said softly. There was some longing in her eyes, and also some uneasiness and desolation. Deity nodded thoughtfully and said softly. I thought you knew everything. Boss Qin, what a wonderful woman you are. It's a pity that you are willing to follow such a man. Qin Weibai's somewhat blank eyes suddenly condensed. She looked at Deity in front of her and said flatly, in my eyes he is the best. Your highness, even if you can be invincible in the world, Tianlan can still be thousands of times better than you. This seemed to be the first time that Qin Weibai showed such obvious aggression. Deity's eyes were a little complicated. He sneered and said, does he deserve it? I know the knot in your heart about him. Qin Weibai said coldly, but I am standing here now. I can represent the will of Samsara Palace. Your highness, if you don't want to be an enemy of Samsara Palace, then you must respect my man. Deity squinted at Qin Weibai. After a long time he chuckled and said softly, I am willing to apologize. No need. Qin Weibai calmly turned around and said, goodbye. I don't know if anyone has told you that you are like a person. Deity looked at Qin Weibai's back and said slowly, but Boss Qin, I still advise you that you'd better think about yourself. No matter how good Li Tianlan is, he is not worth your help. Qin Weibai stopped, but she did not look back. She just said softly, I owe him. What do you owe him? If you really owe him, then you are an enemy. There was a trace of hostility between Deity's eyebrows, and his tone was cold. Qin Weibai's body shook slightly, and her face was a little pale. Deity did not notice this scene. He just said sincerely, You are the woman who amazes me the most. I don't want to be your enemy one day. Whether we are enemies or friends depends on your attitude, Deity said calmly. Qin Weibai slowly stepped forward and said calmly, Similarly, whether we are enemies or friends depends on the knot in your highness' heart. She walked down the stairs and went straight downstairs. Lu Xing Songquan and Tianhai Wuji were still enjoying the snow in the hall downstairs. Seeing Qin Weibai and a Chongsam putting on a coat, Tianhai Wuji's eyes were burning with jealousy. She was the perfect goddess in his heart. But now she belonged to someone else. He stared at Qin Weibai, and the name Li Tianlan came to mind. Qin Weibai suddenly turned around and looked at Tianhai Wuji. If you look at me again, believe it or not, I will dig out your eyes, she said softly. Tianhai Wuji turned his head awkwardly, and his face was livid. Qin Weibai sneered and turned downstairs with flaming fire. They did not take the car arranged by the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Instead, they got in an Audi that seemed to have been waiting at the door. Horsewoman of the 12 supermasters of Samsara sat in the driver's seat and started the car. Boss, I found out. Horsewoman said respectfully. Deity is often with Princess Ziyi, but there is no sign of pregnancy at present. She paused, and her eyes were a little strange. I heard that in order to win over the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the Mikado personally promised that if Ziyi had a child, she would become the Crown Prince of East Island in the future. But I don't know whether the news is true or not. It's true, Qin Weibai said with a smile. The Crown Prince of East Island will be the Mikado of East Island in the future. It's crazy, Paladin said in disbelief. Keep an eye on Ziyi. Qin Weibai leaned against the back of the chair tiredly and said softly, I don't want her to get pregnant. If this really happens, she paused and said calmly, then kill her. The knight's expression turned cold as he nodded. Qin Weibai turned her head to the north and gently raised the corner of her mouth. With her in Snow Country, the scenery in the next few years would indeed be very beautiful. Snow Country with thousands of miles of snow was full of blood. Chapter 283. A journey without a destination is true freedom. East, west, south and north. He could do whatever he wanted. This was a feeling that Li Tianlan had never experienced before. No worries, no fetters. He didn't have to look back because the way he came was far away, and he didn't have to be persistent because his purpose was unknown. Life was a journey. Li Tianlan was already on his way to a future that he didn't know and had never thought about. He passed by mountains and rivers. He passed by the downtown. Li Tianlan became more and more relaxed, both physically and mentally. It was a kind of freedom and leisure after letting go. It was forgetting and ignoring, and then it became pure. Without feelings, thoughts, or emotions, he became more and more focused and illusory. In the mountains and rivers, he was the mountains and rivers. In the downtown, he was the downtown. On the way to the world, he was the world. Only when one was really immersed in it would he find that both the mountains and the downtown had their own charm. The autumn rain after the Mid-Autumn Festival in Huading gradually faded away. He saw the falling leaves in the air in Wuyue. He saw the beautiful mountains and rivers in the Central Plains. He saw the cold dew and frost after a night in Dongshan. In the northern city, he looked at Yuzhou and heard the winter thunder. After passing by Yuzhou, he saw the first snow in Zhongzhou State this year in Liaodong. The journey was still moving forward. In front of him, behind him. Everything was so enchanting, so magnificent. Li Tianlan was deeply immersed in it. On his way, there was no magnificent general trend, no rising wind and surging clouds, only nature. Nature was the most beautiful. He began to become silent and quiet. Too many sceneries along the way were left behind by him, no matter whether he was willing or not. He didn't walk fast, but he never stopped his steps. From the Mid-Autumn Festival to the late winter, he walked thousands of kilometers. A white robe, a red sword and a yellow dog. A silent and focused road. A pure and colorful life. He didn't know what year it was. He seemed to have forgotten martial arts. The Lin clan's famous sword, Divine Punishment, had been on his back, soaked with wind and frost, rain and snow. The scarlet long sword was stained with the color of the soil, mottled and no longer sharp. It was the first sunny day after the light snow in Liaodong. It was already snowing heavily in Guangdong. Li Tianlan finally realized that he was going north. All the way north. Snowflakes like goose feathers fluttered down in every corner, white and flawless. He continued to move forward. Taibai Mountain was in Guangdong. It would be on his way to becoming him, but it would not be his destination. He didn't have a destination, but now that he was here, he suddenly wanted to go to snow country, and even go north. He liked snow. He liked the beauty and holiness of the world of ice and snow. Even if it was illusory, it still had a kind of enchanting charm. Under the heavy snow, Mount Taibai looked more and more misty. No one could see the city on the mountain. But in the vast snow, the entire Taibai mountain seemed to be sighing silently. Li Tianlan took out the badge that Tribulation gave him in Changdao and put it on his chest. The badge was a piece of high-quality black jade. It was completely black, with only a thin white line running through the entire black jade, like a ray of light in the darkness. At the foot of the mountain stood a tall stone tablet. The stone tablet was engraved with the words, Military Restricted Zone in bright red. Li Tianlan glanced at it, and stepped up the mountain. The golden retriever wagged its tail and ran happily behind Li Tianlan. It was quiet and cold on the mountain road. Sai City must have arranged guards here, but perhaps because of the badge, no one came out to stop him. From the foot of the mountain to the mountainside, and then to the top, the wind and snow danced wildly. On the pale Taibai mountain, it seemed that even the snowflakes became cold and flamboyant. A figure finally appeared in Li Tianlan's sight. A man and a woman walked in the wind and snow. Li Tianlan only took a few steps, and the two had already appeared in front of him from a distance. Li Tianlan's face, which had been quiet and peaceful, finally showed a hint of a smile. He looked at the man in front of him. The man's face was still pale, but compared with a few months ago, his essence, qi, and spirit had begun to change subtly. Dressed in black, he stood on the snowy ground. His entire person was hidden like a snowflake, small and insignificant, but with an endless sharpness. Martial uncle. Li Tianlan bowed to Tribulation and said softly, "Long time no see. I heard from some spies at the foot of the mountain that a young man with a dog went up the mountain. I knew it was you, but I didn't expect you to come so late." Tribulation, who had returned from the Sky Academy, said in a calm tone, "Welcome home. I just passed by, so I came up to have a look." Li Tianlan's voice was soft and condensed in the wind and snow. He had reached the top of the mountain, but he could not see Sai City from here. It was said that the city was very beautiful, but for that city, he was a passerby rather than a returnee. Li Tianlan's eyes turned and fell on the woman beside Tribulation. It was a beautiful woman whose age could not be seen. Her age and appearance could not be seen. She wore a white robe, and the loose robe covered her plump and soft figure. Her long black hair was casually coiled behind her head, and a golden mask covered most of her face. Li Tianlan could only see her eyes and beautiful lips, which were flashing with complex expressions. The woman stood in front of Li Tianlan, but it seemed that she was standing on the horizon. It was not that she deliberately alienated him, but Li Tianlan's almost uncontrollable keen perception kept reminding him of the huge gap in strength between him and the other party. The first impression she gave Li Tianlan was that she was gentle and mysterious, but the most straightforward feeling was that she was powerful. It was not just pure sharpness. She was powerful in all aspects. Situt Songyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou State and the governor of Sai City. Li Tianlan bowed deeply to the woman who had helped him a lot when he met her for the first time today. For a moment, he did not know what to say. Call her governor? It seemed too distant. But what else could he call her if not governor? Call me aunt. Situt Songyue took the initiative to speak. Her voice was ethereal and pleasant, as soft as the snow on the mountain. Aunt. Li Tianlan called her in a strange way. Situt Songyue nodded indifferently and said, Let's go in and talk. No. Li Tianlan smiled and shook his head. His eyes were sincere. I came here just to see you and Marshal Uncle. Now that I've seen you, it's enough. He did not ask about Tribulation's injury. This was something that could be seen. Tribulation's injury was getting better, but he had not really recovered to his peak. You're not coming back? Situd Sungyue asked softly. Not going in and not coming back were two completely different meanings. Li Tianlan was suddenly moved, but he still insisted on shaking his head. He pointed to the front, which was the direction of Sai City. There is no freedom there. Sai City was beautiful, but there was a general trend there. It was not the general trend that he wanted, so there would be no freedom. Situd Sungyue fell silent. She looked at Li Tianlan seriously. This was the meeting she had been looking forward to for a long time, but she never thought it would be so hasty. She had not seen enough, and he was going to leave. Okay. Situd Sungyue nodded. What do you need? I'll ask someone to prepare it. No need. Li Tianlan smiled. In a few months he had lost some weight and was taller. Now when he smiled, he had a natural and dazzling demeanor. I'm fine like this. Tianlan, Tribulation paused and said calmly. How are you recovering now? This was probably a question that everyone in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State knew. Even Li Tianlan himself wanted to know. So he shook his head and said softly, I don't know. The astonishment in Tribulation's eyes flashed away. There was a smile in Situd Sungyue's eyes. She looked at Li Tianlan, and the mottled divine punishment behind him. Finally, her eyes fell on the cheerful golden retriever at Li Tianlan's feet. Situd Sungyue thought for a while and then whispered, If you don't want to come back, where do you want to go? North. Li Tianlan said. Snow country. Situd Sungyue raised her eyebrows slightly. She seemed to realize something, and her tone suddenly became dignified. Or do you want to go to the polar region? I haven't decided yet. Li Tianlan whispered. The scenery in the north is very good. I want to have a look. He faced the north. His way was in the north. Situd Sungyue nodded. Li Tianlan moved his feet. Suddenly he seemed to think of something. He frowned slightly and hesitated. Just say what you want to say. As long as Sai City can do it. Situd Sungyue looked at Li Tianlan. Her eyes were beautiful and complicated. Aunt, Li Tianlan called her and said slowly, If I can, I want to see your martial arts. He had seen the Buddhist incantation of 9 words of tribulation, but he had never seen Situd Sungyue make a move. But this was very important to him. Situd Sungyue looked at Li Tianlan in surprise and nodded. Okay. Li Tianlan did not say thank you. Too many times these 2 words seemed to be very weak. Situd Sungyue thought about it. She reached out her hand and stepped forward. In an instant, the cold wind on the top of Mount Taibai suddenly disappeared. Only the flying snowflakes were still floating in the air. Situd Sungyue moved forward again. Her body soared into the air. In silence, countless snowflakes followed her figure and went up against the wind. There seemed to be countless snow dragons on the top of Mount Taibai. Situd Sungyue spun in the heavy snow. Snowflakes danced around her. But the area around her had already become a pure void. That was Situd Sungyue's domain. It was not darkness, but light. The vast snow seemed to become light, covering everything. Situd Sungyue's figure also disappeared in a vast expanse. Whether it was the extreme darkness or the extreme light, once it reached the extreme, there was no difference in essence. Situd Sungyue's figure slowly fell. The light and the void converged, and a large number of snowflakes spread in all directions in an instant. The wind was whistling. Snowflakes swept over the mountains. Endless snow waves rushed up to the sky, messy and broken. Li Tianlan was silent. When I fight, the surrounding is my world and moves with me. Situd Sungyue said calmly. It was Situd Sungyue's world. Naturally, it was useless to the opponent. Useless heaven and earth. Li Tianlan nodded. There should be another move ahead. In this uselessness of heaven and earth, he saw too many familiar things. Its all-embracing collection. Situd Sungyue nodded. There is also a half-move behind called immortality. All-embracing collection. all-embracing collection. Li Tianlan smiled and whispered. It changes, but it's still the 24 moves of sword. Situ Songyue did not speak. Li Tianlan waved his hand and went straight down the mountain. The golden retriever still followed him, shaking its head and wagging its tail. Tribulation looked at Li Tianlan's back and frowned slightly. Is he really going to the polar ground? Only in the most extreme environment can the most perfect breakthrough be made. Situ Songyue looked at Li Tianlan's back and whispered, as far as I know, many years ago, someone successfully broke through in the polar ground. He didn't start over, but directly broke through to the invincible realm. Who? Tribulation raised his eyebrows. He had been pursuing his own martial arts and didn't know much about these things. Chapter 284. Wang Tianzong was looking at the sea. The sea was turbulent. The sword and tent around him seemed to be turbulent with the sea. Across the sea was snow country, which was also the direction Wang Tianzong was looking at. He had been standing here for nearly 24 hours. The sun rose and the moon set. The cold sea breeze whistled past. The black coat was fluttering vividly in the wind. Wang Tianzong was motionless, like a statue. Here was Beihai Province. Here was Mount Dibing. It was the highest place on Mount Dibing. Flowers and plants flourished all year round on Mount Dibing, but there was no bright color here. Rocks. Only rocks. The rock path from the bottom to the top connected to the stone platform at the top. After hundreds of years of wind and rain, countless rocks looked old and weathered. The highest stone platform was not large, with an area of hundreds of square meters. A stone tablet with a height of tens of meters stood at the highest point of the whole Mount Dibing, perfectly integrated with the surrounding rocks, looking hard and boundless. The sky was gloomy. The sea was gloomy. The ancient stone platform between the sky and the sea was getting darker. The sound of waves and the sea breeze whistled together. Wang Tianzong stood on the stone platform with a silent face. The scene was solemn. Solemnity was also a kind of hesitation. Wang Shengxiao slowly climbed the stone platform from the foot of the mountain and looked at his father in his sight. He did not speak, but first bowed to the tall stone tablet behind Wang Tianzong seriously, and then whispered, Dad, Mom asked me to call you back. She made soup for you. No. Wang Tianzong shook his head and said quietly, I want to be alone. Wang Shengxiao was a little embarrassed and helpless. Has your second uncle come back? Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. Yes. Wang Shengxiao was stunned. He went up the mountain this morning. I heard that you were here, so I didn't come to bother you. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and said, Call him here. Wang Shengxiao answered and took out his mobile phone to make a call. As the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, Wang Tianzong was different from other big shots in many aspects. The most different was that Wang Tianzong did not have his own study. In other words, his study did not have the significance of the existence of other studies. Wang Tianzong rarely read books and rarely reviewed documents in the study. He rarely talked with others in the study. He was also too lazy to stay in the study to think about life. That so-called study was just a decoration. Wang Tianzong preferred the current stone platform. This place had the peace he wanted, and also the glory he wanted. This was the forbidden area of the entire Mount Dibing, named the stage of formidable person. It was a place where all the ups and downs, glory and brilliance of the Wang family of Beihai for hundreds of years were gathered. Wang Tianzong turned around and looked at the stone tablet in the center of the stage of formidable person. The stone tablet looked desolate under the gloomy sky. This was the famous stone of formidable person in the dark world. Countless names were carved on the stone of formidable person. Some of the names had already dimmed, but they still shone brightly in the long river of history. There were many names, but compared to the stone of formidable person, they only occupied a small portion. Some of the names on it were ancestors of the Wang family of Beihai, some were pioneers of Zhongzhou State, some were invincible figures in the dark world, and some were giants in business and politics. The ancestors of the Lin clan were also there. The seniors of the Li family were also there. For hundreds of years, those who had made great contributions to the Wang family of Beihai were all on it. Glory, pride, romance, prosperity. All the lights of the Wang family of Beihai were gathered here. Wang Tianzong gently stroked the stone tablet in front of him. His expression was affectionate with sincere awe. The waves hit the stage of formidable person. On the stage of formidable person, the contemporary hero of the Wang family of Beihai faced the stone of formidable person. It was like facing the past today. Each was lonely. The future of the Wang family of Beihai will be yours after all. Wang Tianzong didn't look back and said softly, "You have to shoulder the future of the Wang family of Beihai." Wang Shengxiao rarely saw his father like this. He nodded and said in a deep voice, "Don't worry, father. Li Tianlan refused me, so I brought Yuetong back." Wang Tianzong sighed softly with undisguised regret. If he agreed to come to Mount Dibing, in the future, in the dark world, in the next decades, who will be your opponent? Wang Shengxiao didn't say anything. His mind was always calm, so he didn't have any hostility when mentioning Li Tianlan. But hearing this name, Wang Shengxiao always thought of the day in Changdao when he bowed in front of Li Tianlan. His eyes were calm and he said softly, "We are opponents." Opponent? Wang Tianzong raised his eyebrows. "You have no opponent, at least not now. Who knows where Li Tianlan is? If he doesn't show up, you have no opponent. If he shows up, you may not be his opponent." Wang Shengxiao raised his eyebrows. He was a little dissatisfied, but he didn't dare to say anything. The entire Wang family of Beihai had a headache because of Li Tianlan's disappearance recently. Although Wang Shengxiao rarely left the Wang family of Beihai, he had a clear view of the overall situation of Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan became famous after the battle in Heaven Capital. His resurrection greatly stimulated the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. So the two sides cooperated to promote the reform of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. The Southeast Special Warfare Headquarters was the result of the reform. But now the reform had taken place, and Li Tianlan disappeared. In this way, although both Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai gained a lot of benefits because of the reform, the relationship between the two sides seemed to become subtle after they lost the target that they could target. A few months had passed. Although the Southeast Special Warfare Headquarters had been established, the follow-up action had to be temporarily put on hold for various reasons. There were also different voices inside the Wang family of Beihai. The special warfare system began to become chaotic. Now his father asked him to call second uncle over, probably to talk about these things. "Dad, after the spring festival, if I have nothing to do, I want to go out for a walk." Wang Shengxiao was silent for a while and said softly. He was now in the thunder-shocking realm. Although he had just broken through the realm for less than a year, his combat capability was close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. And he was not even an individual expert a half-step to the invincible realm. In this special and sensitive period, Wang Shengxiao needed to pursue his own path, find the most suitable martial arts for himself, and prepare for breaking through to the invincible realm in the future. "You are the future of the Wang family of Beihai. Now I'm here, you can go if you want." Wang Tianzong said softly. Wang Shengxiao nodded. In his sight, Wang Xiaoyao's figure had appeared on the stage of formidable person. He called second uncle. Wang Xiaoyao nodded. He looked at Wang Tianzong and said, "Brother, what's the matter?" "The patriarch of the Lolita family is dead," Wang Tianzong said. Wang Xiaoyao and Wang Shengxiao were stunned at the same time. This news was not a secret. In the past 2 days, it had spread all over the world. But the two did not expect that Wang Tianzong's first sentence was not domestic, but abroad. The Lolita family was a wealthy family in Snow Country, and one of the energy oligarchs in Snow Country. It was powerful. Similarly, this family was also an important part of the Polar Ground Alliance. The Polar Ground Alliance was an alliance. Its internal structure was not like that of other forces. On the contrary, it was a loose but extremely large organization. The Lolita family could be said to be an extremely important node in the Polar Ground Alliance. However, Wang Xiaoyao was a little annoyed. "I know this news. It is said that they seized power internally, and the method is very clean. It seems to have nothing to do with us, right? The method is very clean." Wang Tianzong smiled. "Maybe there is a cleaner method that we can't see." He glanced at Wang Xiaoyao and suddenly said, "What do you think of the Samsara Palace?" The Samsara Palace. Wang Xiaoyao was a little hesitant, a little sad, and a little missing. For a moment he could not speak. "Because you used to please Qin Weibai, we have cooperated with the Samsara Palace several times. So we can roughly figure out some forces in the Samsara Palace. And from behind these forces, we can roughly see some of Qin Weibai's methods." Wang Tianzong thought of Qin Weibai's beautiful face and sighed softly. He was even old enough to be Qin Weibai's father, so he did not think about beauty. He just marveled at her methods. It could be said that she was the most peculiar woman he had ever seen in his life. If she was willing to marry Xiaorao. What a pity, what a pity. "Brother, do you suspect that little Bai is behind the Lolita family's affairs?" Wang Xiaoyao frowned. "I can't see her or anyone's shadow. It happens so quickly and cleanly, so cleanly that it makes people uneasy," Wang Tianzong said softly. He now controlled several subordinate families of the Samsara Palace. Coincidentally, those families had experienced a great change similar to the seizure of power a few years ago. Everything looked clean, but afterward, no one knew that they had joined the Samsara Palace. Listening to the thunder in silence. This method was too quiet and clean. The Lolita family, which had been very stable in recent years, suddenly did this. He had to be vigilant. But even if the Samsara Palace takes action against the Polar Ground Alliance, it has nothing to do with us. The Samsara Palace is cooperating with the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Wang Tianzong interrupted Wang Xiaoyao. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital occupies East Island. If the Samsara Palace takes Snow Country, what will the Wang family of Beihai do? Wang Xiaoyao was stunned, and his face changed dramatically. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital occupied East Island. If the Samsara Palace took Snow Country, the Wang family of Beihai was right between East Island and Snow Country. At that time, if the two superpowers declared war on the Wang family of Beihai at the same time, it seemed that both Snow Country and East Island had reasons to support the two superpowers. What a big trap. Wake up. Wang Tianzong looked at Wang Xiaorao. "We will not be friends. You must be clear about this. Neither the Purgatory of Heaven Capital nor the Samsara Palace are friends for us." Not friends. Naturally, they were enemies. Wang Xiaoyao's face was complicated. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Wang Tianzong knew what he wanted to ask, but he didn't answer. From the moment he saw Deity's sword in Heaven Capital, he knew that he and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital were not friends. It was also on that night. In that cold and decisive sword light, he also recognized the sword of the master of Samsara Palace. So Wang Tianzong also knew that he and the Samsara Palace would not be friends. Wang Tianzong really regretted that Li Tianlan refused the Wang family of Beihai. Not only for himself, but also for Li Tianlan himself. The heavenly son of Zhongzhou State would eventually become a tragedy. Wang Tianzong's eyes were full of mockery. The Wang family of Beihai. The Li family. Kunlun City. There was nothing noble or despicable about it. Everyone wanted something, so they would naturally take action. "Is there any news about Li Tianlan?" Wang Tianzong asked. Since Li Tianlan left Huating, the Wang family of Beihai had always attached great importance to tracking him. But there was still no exact information. Wang Xiaoyao shook his head and whispered, "I'm still looking for him." Wang Tianzong agreed and suddenly said thoughtfully, "How is Ning Xuan doing recently?" Wang Xiaoyao's eyes narrowed and he looked up at Wang Tianzong. Ning Xuan, commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations of Zhongzhou State, one of the core figures of the Southeast Group. Recently, there had been voices in the Southeast Group asking the group to accept the Li family again and restore the time when the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family coexisted. Some influential people also vaguely expressed their opinions. And Ning Ziyuan was one of the louder voices among these people. No one was surprised by his attitude, because Ning Ziyuan was promoted by the father and son of the Li family. Only Wang Tianzong was surprised. Because his attitude was too normal, it seemed abnormal in his eyes. "Not bad." Wang Xiaoyao replied cautiously, "Brother, don't worry. I will persuade him." Wang Tianzong took a deep look at Wang Xiaoyao, nodded, and said 3 things recently. First, summarize all the information about Snow Country in detail, and increase the investment in Snow Country. Second, finally Tianlan. Third, inform Tyrant of the Polar Ground Alliance, and invite him to visit the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Xiaorao nodded and suddenly said, Brother, Yuetong. I'll tell her in person. Wang Tianzong waved his hand expressionlessly. Wang Xiaoyao said no more and walked down the stage of Formidable Person with Wang Xingxiao. Wang Tianzong didn't look at Snow Country anymore. He stood in front of the stone of Formidable Person, reached out, and gently touched the huge stone with too many meanings in front of him. It was silent. Wang Xingxiao looked back on the way down the mountain. The stone of Formidable Person in his sight was very big. His father's figure was very small. He watched his father reach out and touch the stone tablet. It was a kind of careful caution and awe emanating from his bones. Perhaps only the Sword Emperor standing on the stage of Formidable Person was the real Sword Emperor. Wang Xingxiao watched quietly. On the stage of Formidable Person, the Sword Emperor took off the invincible halo. What was revealed was fear, cowardice, carefulness, prudence, and hesitation. For the first time, Wang Shengxiao felt the weight on his shoulders. He suddenly remembered his father in his memory. It seemed that as long as he could remember, Wang Tianzong had never smiled much in his impression. He had always been calm and silent. One person, one sword. He carried the entire Wang family of Beihai on his weak shoulders and sprinted to the top. That position was too high. The road to the top was a dangerous one with no way out. He couldn't retreat, because behind him were tens of millions of people of Beihai Province, hundreds of thousands of troops of Beihai Province, and the rise and fall of the entire Wang family of Beihai. He couldn't retreat, and he didn't dare to retreat. So he was invincible, but he rarely really relaxed. Under the invincible halo, he was not high-spirited, free, or doing whatever he wanted. He was really cautious, even timid. The scenery at the top of the world might be wonderful, but he was not complacent. Chapter 285. New Year's Eve was coming. It snowed heavily in Beihai Province. Auspicious snow heralded a bumper harvest. The falling snowflakes seemed to fade away on Mount Dibbing. Mount Dibbing was pure white, holy and elegant. It was still snowing. Wang Yuetong stood on the wide balcony and looked at the dancing snowflakes outside, lost in thought. In the middle of the year, she had made an appointment with several good friends to go skiing in the Celestial and Human Canyon in Kanglan City. But those friends had never contacted her since she came back. Mount Dibbing was near Xingzhou, the capital of Beihai Province. Wang Yuetong had returned to the Wang family of Beihai from Huating for a few months. She hadn't even been to Xingzhou. How could she have the mood to go skiing in Kanglan City hundreds of miles away? Wang Yuetong became more and more silent. She never went down the mountain and seldom went out. After coming back from Huating, she seemed to have completely closed herself up. Without any entertainment activities, she meditated and cultivated in silence every day. When she was tired, she watched a movie, rested, slept and ate. Day after day, everyone knew that the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai had returned to Mount Dibbing, but few people could see her. The lights in the exquisite palace where she lived were on. That seemed to be the only difference between before and after the little princess came back. Autumn and winter were alternating. Winter was about to pass. Wang Yuetong was still quiet and still silent. The most delicate flower of the Wang family of Beihai had bloomed in every corner of Mount Dibbing, but now she chose to bloom in her own space. She had never withered, but she was a little more proud and stubborn than before. That was her struggle, although she knew early on that there would be no result. The cold wind poured into the balcony from the open window and rushed into the room. The hazy gauze curtain in the room danced with the cold wind. Wang Yuetong faced the wind and snow. Her fresh and refined little face was more attractive. A beautiful young woman in her early 30s walked into the room and looked at Wang Yuetong, who was wearing thin clothes on the balcony. She sighed, took a coat from the wardrobe, walked over, and put it on Wang Yuetong. She said helplessly, "Wicked girl, no matter how dissatisfied you are, you can't make fun of your health, can you? If you catch a cold, I will take care of you." Your father has been very busy recently. I think he has almost forgotten about us. Do you still expect him to feel sorry for you? The young woman was extremely beautiful, with a mature and enchanting figure. The charm of a woman was vividly reflected in her. She was wearing light-colored cotton pajamas, and her hair was playing. Standing in front of Wang Yuetong without makeup, she looked like a pair of sisters. But in reality, they were mother and daughter. Mom, I've entered the fire-flaming realm. I won't catch a cold even if it's a little cold. Wang Yuetong looked at her mother in front of her, and said in an intimate tone, I don't understand your profound martial arts. The woman smiled, and there was an indescribable gentleness in her smile. The weather is cold, and it's not good to wear too little. I've made some soup, come and have a bowl. Wang Yuetong said. Just as she was about to turn around, the woman chuckled. That heartless man is here. Go and welcome him. Wang Yuetong turned around subconsciously. In his sight, Wang Tianzong's calm and silent figure was stepping on the wind and snow all over the sky and had already arrived outside the hall. Beside him was a young man about 25 or 26 years old. The young man looked ordinary, but he looked gentle and elegant. Wang Yuetong seemed to suddenly understand something. Her face was a little pale, and she suddenly felt cold. I won't go. Wang Yuetong bit her red lips hard. Her face was as white and transparent as the snow outside. The woman looked at her daughter's stubborn and aggrieved face, and then looked at the young man beside her husband outside the hall. She shook her head and said softly, Maybe it's not what you think. Anyway, I have to go and have a look. Wang Yuetong just shook her head and said nothing. The woman reached out her hand and gently touched Wang Yuetong's hair. Her tone was softer. In fact, even if it's what you think, it's not necessarily a bad thing. That young man is your Uncle Wu's son. Don't you trust your father's judgment? I haven't seen the boy named Li Tianlan, but I have a vague impression of him from what you said these days and the rumors outside. He's the most outstanding young man in Zhongzhou State today, isn't he? It's normal that you like him. But since your father objects to you two being together, he must have his reasons. The woman's eyes were soft and calm. Tong Tong, you should believe your father. The person he chooses may not be the best, but he must be the most suitable for you. Based on your father's character, it's impossible for him to hand you over simply for interests. Now there is no one in the world who deserves this. I just want senior brother Tianlan. Wang Yuetong shook her head, looking stubborn. The woman chuckled as if she was looking at a shameless child. But senior brother Tianlan isn't yours. No one can deny his excellence, but for you he's really not a good match. The descendant of the Li family, this identity can represent too many things. Nowadays, the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State is the era of Kunlun City. No matter how strong the Li family was back then, 20 years is enough to change everything. In fact, Li Tianlan's excellence is what worries me the most. People who are too outstanding will not be willing to be ordinary. He carries too many things on his back and has such a talent, so from the beginning he won't have a way out. He has to keep moving forward and reverse the general trend alone. In such a process, no matter whether he wins or loses, it will be too tragic. He may gain a lot, but he is also destined to lose a lot. It's magnificent. Ups and downs, turbulent winds and scudding clouds. These may be very good words for men, but for women, happiness and stability are the most important. Not to mention that Li Tianlan is still on the opposite side of us. Even if he is willing to join the Wang family of Beihai, in my heart, I actually don't want you to be with him. She looked at her daughter in a trance and muttered to herself. The more beautiful the women around the giants are, the more sad they are. Mom, are you talking about yourself? Wang Yuetong looked at the woman's eyes and asked. The woman was stunned and then chuckled. Of course not. Although your father is also a giant, the Wang family of Beihai doesn't have to go against the general trend. He may be under a lot of pressure, but he has never lost his temper with me. We don't have to worry about survival. Why should I be sad? But Li Tianlan is different. If he wants to survive, he has to go against the trend. You may be glorious by his side, but you won't be happy. You won't understand. Wang Yuetong whispered. The Wang family of Beihai has been in a high position these years. It's so high that even I can see too many things clearly. I've seen a lot of things. I've seen the so-called forbearance of those who sacrifice their loved ones for the sake of interests, and the so-called sacrifice of those who would rather abandon their wives and children for survival. I've seen too many. And Tianlan. Her eyes were a little dazed. He was the first man I met who would stand behind me when I was in danger. She chuckled. And at that time he already knew my identity. My identity was not friendly to him, but even so he still stood in front of me. That's because you had never been in danger before. The woman didn't know whether to laugh or cry. If you were in danger, too many people would be willing to do so. It's different. Wang Yuetong said quietly, because at that time, he knew very well that even if he helped me block the danger, he would not get any benefits. When the woman was about to speak, the voice of Wang Tianzong, who had been pressing the doorbell for a long time, rang directly from outside the hall. He said calmly and indifferently, "Summer solstice, open the door." The woman responded subconsciously. She touched her daughter's hair and turned to go downstairs. Wang Yuetong bit her lip tightly. Her eyes looked out of the door, as if she had suddenly made up her mind. She put on her coat and went downstairs. In the living room on the first floor of the hall, Wang Tianzong had walked in with a young man. Summer Solstice was talking to the young man with a chuckle. Wang Tianzong was about to go upstairs. He saw Wang Yuetong coming down. He subconsciously froze. "Dad." Wang Yuetong took the initiative to greet him. Wang Tianzong's facial muscles softened a little. He nodded and said, "Come down." Wang Yuetong followed Wang Tianzong with a calm face. The young man chatting with Summer Solstice with a respectful face also stood up. Seeing Wang Yuetong, who was still beautiful without any makeup, his eyes obviously brightened. Then he smiled and said, "Yuetong, long time no see. I'm Wu Qiong. When I was a child, I often took you to Xingzhou to play." "I know." Wang Yuetong nodded with a chuckle. "Brother Wu, I heard that you went to Star State for further study? Did you just go home?" "Yes." Wu Qiong smiled and looked emotional. "I haven't been back for almost 10 years. Little Wu won't leave this time. I will arrange a position for him in Xingzhou in the near future. Yuetong, you are all young people. You should communicate more in the future." Wang Tianzong whispered, "Your Uncle Wu has been looking forward to you being his daughter-in-law. He has said this for many years. I saw little Wu a few days ago. He is really a good kid." "Uncle, you flatter me." Wu Qiong quickly bowed. Wang Yuetong looked at Wu Qiong. Her eyes were quiet. The Wu family was one of the rich families in Beihai. Wu Qiong's father was Wu Qiu. He was not famous in the dark world, but in terms of strength, he was definitely the top expert in the Wang family of Beihai. He controlled the internal security forces on Mount Dibing, and could be said to be Wang Tianzong's most trusted right-hand man. Wang Yuetong also had a good impression of Uncle Wu, but she had never thought about being Uncle Wu's daughter-in-law, although she had heard such jokes many times. "Father, do you mean to unite with the Wu family by marriage?" Wang Yuetong asked straightforwardly. "It's not a marriage." Wang Tianzong frowned. "Wu Qiong is good. You can try to date him for a period of time. If there is no if," Wang Yuetong said indifferently, "I won't marry into the Wu family, so there is no need to try." It could be imagined how embarrassing it was to say this directly in front of the person involved. Wu Qiong's face turned red and he couldn't speak for a while. "Why? Tong, don't be too capricious." Summer Solstice sat aside and wanted to smooth things over. But Wang Yuetong had made up her mind to make a big scene. "Why?" she asked in reply and then looked directly at Wu Qiong. "Brother Wu, do you want to know why?" Wu Qiong's face turned red, but he still insisted on nodding. It was a great honor for the whole Wu family to be able to marry the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai. How could he accept it? "Because here." Wang Yuetong pointed to her mouth and chuckled. Her mouth was small, red and soft. Wang Yuetong's smile was beautiful and enchanting. "Because I have eaten from senior brother Tianlan." Her face was blushing, but her eyes were unusually brave. She thought for a moment and described. "It's that I am naked and kneeling in front of him. And then, I have eaten from there. She was confused. Wu Qiong was confused. Summer solstice was confused. Wang Tianzong was confused too. The three of them stared at Wang Yuetong, who was blushing but talking happily. For a moment, they didn't know how to react. Anyway, I have eaten from there, in the Sky Academy. Wang Yuetong looked at Wu Qiong. That's the reason. I have eaten from senior brother Tianlan, so my mouth can't say I love you, or I want it to other men. Because I want to be shameless. Chapter 286. After leaving Sai City, Snow Country was less than 500 kilometers away. Snow Country was magnificent. In winter, snow fell continuously. The weather was cold, and the ground was frozen. Everywhere was desolate and quiet. All the way north, Li Tianlan's footsteps finally began to slow down. At the border of Snow Country, he began his first meditation since he set out. In the whistling wind and snow, he meditated for 16 hours. Li Tianlan's figure seemed to completely disappear from the world and became completely illusory. Li Tianlan became more and more silent. He shuttled through the primeval forest at the border between Zhongzhou State and Snow Country. There were only trees and wind and snow in front of him. The world was quiet. Silence was freedom. The golden retriever named Baby grew up every day. The icy and snowy environment didn't seem to bother it at all. It followed Li Tianlan all the time, carefree and natural. The golden retriever was the only person Li Tianlan could talk to. But Li Tianlan talked less and less. He was so quiet that he seemed to be integrated with the coldness of Snow Country. Thousands of words and ambitions before departure disappeared bit by bit. Silence. Silence. Concentration. Pure. Watching the flying snow and listening to the cold wind. He meditated for longer and longer periods of time, and more frequently. Most of the time every day, Li Tianlan would sit in the forest and explore his martial arts. The primeval forest was lush with trees. The snow outside stopped and began to fall again. Whether it stopped or fell. Because a lot of snow had accumulated on the trunks of the forest, the snowflakes in the forest were falling all day long. The snowflakes fell from the trees and drowned Li Tianlan in meditation. So most of the time every day, there would be a snowman sitting quietly beside the golden retriever, silent and motionless. There was not much food in the forest in winter, but as long as he looked for it, there would always be food. When not meditating, Li Tianlan was a hunter. Rabbits in winter were generally easy to catch. The man and the dog ate a lot of rabbit meat, and Li Tianlan's barbecue skills gradually became better. He began to try to train the golden retriever. It was indeed a very intelligent dog. A good pet dog was gradually trained by him into a hunting dog. Maybe it was not qualified, but the golden retriever had learned to catch some relatively easy small animals in winter. So Li Tianlan changed from a hunter to a chef. The golden retriever gave the prey to Li Tianlan, and Li Tianlan processed it and ate it. Meditation. Moving forward. Cooking, survival. There were also times when the golden retriever didn't get anything. That day the man and the dog could only starve. The beginning of winter passed, and soon it was deep winter. The man was thin, and so was the dog. But for the first time, a trace of illusory sword intent appeared on Li Tianlan. It was as if he was born with a sword intent that had perfectly integrated with his entire body, similar to his temperament. Li Tianlan walked slower and slower. He still did not draw his sword. The famous sword, Heavenly Punishment, had been hanging on his back all this time. It had been eroded by the wind and snow, looking even more ancient. Li Tianlan occasionally stroked the hilt and scabbard, but he never thought of pulling them out. Because the sound of the sword being drawn was too loud. Because the sword light was too bright. Li Tianlan wanted silence. The snowstorm in the primeval forest seemed to have become a part of his life. This kind of peace was like heaven to him. A man and a dog spent their first spring festival in the primeval forest of Guangbao. There were no lights or hustle and bustle. Li Tianlan, who had thrown away his phone, could not get any information from the outside world. New Year's Eve. On the day of reunion, what he faced was only the snowstorm that filled the forest. He started a fire in the most primitive way in the forest. The orange-red flames swayed in the surrounding snow, bringing with them smoke and dust. The fire illuminated Li Tianlan's face. The surrounding forest was still hazy and dark in the snow. The grown-up golden retriever lay between Li Tianlan and the fire, wagging its tail. Its furry tail swept on Li Tianlan's calf. So lonely, so quiet, so enjoyable. The sword intent seemed to gradually light up in the fire. He gently stroked the head of the golden retriever. The fire burned and then went out. From New Year's Eve to New Year's, Li Tianlan, who was already 20 years old, stepped out of the primeval forest of snow country with the dog. To the north. Continued to the north. He rarely stayed in the cities of snow country. Many of his supplies were even replenished in the small towns near the urban area. Winter had passed. But all the way to the north, the weather in snow country was getting colder and colder. Li Tianlan still did not drive. He just walked step by step on the journey of tens of thousands of miles. He was not pursuing. He was just walking on his own lonely road. That was his cultivation. It was still snowing in the spring in the center of snow country. It was snowing heavily. It was nearly 40 degrees below zero in spring. In the flying snow, Li Tianlan took off his shoes and stepped barefoot in the snow. The golden retriever ran happily around him. Li Tianlan's eyes were always calm and firm. The snow was very cold. But every step he took, Li Tianlan could feel the power of the earth. Snow country was vast. The endless flying snow finally stopped. Li Tianlan saw the surging and towering rivers and mountains of snow country, and the flowing sea. He walked behind time. So spring had passed. Snow country entered the cool midsummer. Li Tianlan's meditation time decreased from long to short. He was still dressed in white, walking barefoot on the land of snow country. The white clothes made of cloud silk were not dirty or faded at all. They were still as clear and bright as before. The beard at the corner of Li Tianlan's mouth was getting longer and longer, and the beard on his chin was hanging down dark. His hair covered the back of his head, and began to fall to his shoulders. He still carried divine punishment on his back. The famous sword that carried the sword intent of the ancestors of Xianyuan, and the masters of the Lin clan began to tremble on his back. Li Tianlan's world once again heard the sound of the long sword clanging. He approached the desert of snow country. He also stopped in the desert of snow country for the time being. He stopped by the Volga River in snow country. So the golden retriever began to eat fish. It could even go into the water to catch fish. The long sword on Li Tianlan's back trembled every day, but he didn't seem to notice it. He just soaked his callous feet in the water every day and looked up at the sky. The sky of snow country was very clear. It was a natural magnificence. The golden retriever began to move farther and farther away from Li Tianlan, and no longer stuck to him. Its eyes occasionally showed humanized fear. It often stared at the long sword on Li Tianlan's back, and occasionally barked in a low voice. The summer began to pass. The bleak autumn day made people feel more lonely in snow country. The golden retriever, who had eaten too much fish and wanted to vomit, bit Li Tianlan's sleeve with its mouth many times. Li Tianlan finally stopped being in a daze by the river. He prepared enough clean water, crossed the Volga River, and directly entered the desert of snow country on a sunny day. The white robe disappeared in the vast expanse of yellow sand. The storm began to enter the desert. Divine punishment on Li Tianlan's back became completely quiet and no longer trembled. After the sandstorm, the barren desert became even quieter. The scenery was the same. A person who never changes. A dog that never changes. Li Tianlan's eyes became completely clear. He was not in a daze, nor was he meditating. He was getting faster and faster. The golden retriever seemed to be unable to stand the sometimes hot and sometimes cold yellow sand in the desert. Its pace was a little staggered and became listless. Li Tianlan simply wrapped the golden retriever's limbs with gauze. Finally, he simply carried it on his back and continued to move forward. He stepped barefoot in the yellow sand with a deep and firm sense of strength. A deep line of footprints was left in the quiet desert, spreading far and wide. A gale gradually rose in the desert. The yellow sand that seemed to wreak havoc in the whole world flew wildly in the desert. The wind rose and fell. The yellow sand fell. The deep footprints that spread out in the desert were still there, clear and deep, without any change. At the end of the desert was the grassland of snow country. Cattle and sheep were everywhere. His short hair had become long. Li Tianlan, whose short beard had become long, finally stopped being silent. He still didn't talk much, but he occasionally chatted with the golden retriever. During the journey of tens of thousands of miles, the man and the dog had already developed a deep relationship. Although the intelligent golden retriever couldn't speak, it often responded to Li Tianlan with its actions. So the loneliness gradually faded away. A smile appeared on Li Tianlan's face. The illusory sword intent surrounded him and completely became his own temperament, making him seem to have a sense of alienation from the whole world. But he smiled happily. Behind this focused and pure smile, he seemed to forget something. Or in other words, he didn't want to think about it for the time being. The grassland deep in snow country was bitterly cold. In this environment where they didn't have to worry about food and supplies, the man and the dog became more and more energetic. In the coldness that could almost obliterate everything, Li Tianlan and the golden retriever spent the second New Year's Eve in the cold wind. A trace of white gradually appeared in the distant sky of the night. That was not the dawn of the new year. It was the glacier. That was the color of the polar region. Li Tianlan led the dog and continued to move forward. The polar region in the north was not a continent. It was the sea, and there were countless islands covered by glaciers. The new year began to pass gradually. Spring was coming. Li Tianlan's world became dark. There was no more sunshine. There was only night and the cold moon all day long. It was the polar night in the polar region. For a few months, it would be shrouded in darkness 24 hours a day. Li Tianlan and the golden retriever arrived at the seaside of the Arctic Ocean. The glacier was in sight. It was the closest one to him. The seawater rose and fell under Li Tianlan's feet. Li Tianlan looked at the glacier in the distance silently. In the night, the man, the dog, and the sword were quiet. They were all extreme. He reached out his hand, pointed at the glacier in the night, and whispered, "Baby, let's go and have a look." The golden retriever whimpered, and seemed to understand Li Tianlan's words. It went around to Li Tianlan's back and jumped directly on his back. It was next to the divine punishment. The divine punishment was silent, not sharp, and not cold. Li Tianlan stepped forward. His footsteps stepped on the water, causing irregular ripples. He was very fast. He walked farther and farther on the sea, deeper and deeper. The waves rolled and fluctuated under his feet. Li Tianlan moved forward with a calm face. He walked on the sea. He walked on the sea. He let the waves roll, neither sinking nor rising. The polar night in the Arctic Ocean was still the same. The darkness seemed to be endless. Li Tianlan walked silently. He walked from the border of Zhongzhou state to the prosperous Huiding, and finally shone his most dazzling light in heaven capital. All the light seemed to have faded away into the past. It had been nearly 2 years. Chapter 287. He floated along with the waves like a wanderer without any direction. Li Tianlan really didn't need directions. What he needed was silence. Whether it was freezing cold or scorching hot, whether it was hell or heaven, peace was enough. Only the quietest environment could temper the purest and most focused willpower. That was the power he needed, and it would also become his unbreakable martial arts foundation. In the polar region of the polar night, it was dark day and night. Time had lost its meaning. Li Tianlan, who had completely let go of everything, passed by the glacier and walked on the sea like a ghost, ethereal and illusory. The polar region was rich in resources. Resources meant benefits. Therefore, the edge of the polar region was not as deserted as imagined. Every country had its own workstation. Regardless of whether it was the polar day or the polar night, the edge of the polar region was always noisy. He continued to move forward. In the darkness in his world, the lights of the workstation began to fade away, disappear, and finally disappear completely. A lonely and cold glacier. Deep darkness. The biting cold wind and snow. This was Li Tianlan's path. He walked quietly, as if he would walk until the end of time. The polar region was huge. In a world of ice and snow, There was an endless sea and undulating glaciers. Li Tianlan didn't know how long he had been walking. His world was getting quieter and quieter. Wind, snow and glaciers gradually became everything. The darkness of the polar night began to dissipate. The sun rose and the moon set in the polar region, and the day and night alternated. Li Tianlan boarded an island covered with glaciers. His footsteps finally stopped. It wasn't that he didn't want to move forward. This was the first time his body had a problem after walking for thousands of miles. A sharp pain engulfed his entire body without warning. It was as if his body, which had long been assimilated by the surrounding cold temperature, began to feel the extreme cold. Pain coursed through his body. Li Tianlan clearly felt that his body was becoming stiff little by little. The severe pain and coldness tore at his body as if they wanted to crush every inch of his flesh and blood. He fell shivering on the glittering and gloomy glacier. There was only a fully grown golden retriever by his side. He subconsciously held the golden retriever in his arms. The golden retriever meekly curled up in his arms and occasionally licked his face. His spirit gradually became absent-minded in the pain, but Li Tianlan gritted his teeth and held on. His condition was not good enough for him to hunt for food in the polar regions. The man and the dog could only starve. His body temperature began to decrease. But Li Tianlan gradually felt the heat. It was as if the coldness originated from within his body. The glacier in his body seemed to have completely melted, and then turned into an erupting volcano. A high temperature was brewing in his body. The pain became numb in the heat. Li Tianlan began to feel itchy. That kind of crazy itch seemed to seep out from the bones, first his legs, then his arms. His limbs felt like there were countless ants crawling under his skin. Li Tianlan, who had been maintaining a trace of clarity, completely collapsed in the shortest time possible. There was only silence in the polar region. Only his unbearable roar reverberated across the glacier. He rolled and struggled on the thick layer of ice, his clean fingers stabbing into the thick layer of ice. Helpless howls filled with despair echoed across the desolate glacier, occasionally accompanied by the barking of a dog. His limbs felt as if they were about to be completely crippled. The indescribable pain and itch were constantly eroding his nerves. Li Tianlan exhausted his remaining strength and fell into a coma on the glacier. The sun rose and the moon set. This was the warmest time in the polar region. The average temperature was about 10 degrees below zero. But this was also the most desperate time for Li Tianlan since he set off. Li Tianlan gradually woke up from his coma. He didn't know how long he had been in a coma. The strange pain and itch in his limbs still existed, but it had faded a lot. He felt hunger. The hunger of near death gnawed at his nerves. The golden retriever was lying next to him, and it seemed to be on the verge of death. Li Tianlan felt weak all over, which was even more tragic and weak than when his foundation was completely destroyed. He struggled to get up, dragged the golden retriever to a place sheltered from the wind, and then almost killed a polar reindeer nearby. When he dragged the reindeer back, the golden retriever had some spirit, but it still looked sick. Li Tianlan, who was about to collapse, pointed to his prey. He really had no strength to make a fire. The man and the dog barely dealt with the reindeer's body and directly ate the raw meat. The raw meat and blood, with the unique coldness of the polar region, were swallowed by him. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm, but his sight was already spinning. He seemed to have been hungry for a long time. Piece after piece of bloody venison was eaten by him. Taste. Indescribable taste. He only knew to replenish the energy for survival. In a trance, the pain and itch in his limbs seemed to fade as he ate. Li Tianlan ate more and more. The man and the dog almost ate up the whole reindeer. Li Tianlan fainted again. The moonlight on the horizon gradually disappeared. The sun rose and never set again. The polar region began to enter the polar day. There was sunshine over the Arctic Ocean day and night. The sun was bright and cold. Li Tianlan, who woke up again, began to be in a daze again. The feeling of weakness in his body had completely disappeared. The changes that were enough to kill people in just a few days began to fade away. Li Tianlan finally understood that it was not illness. It was an unimaginable wealth. Or a treasure. Under the sun, a smile gradually appeared in his calm eyes. The smile overflowed from his eyes, spread at the corners of his mouth, and became more and more obvious. He laughed out loud. The clear laughter kept echoing in the ice glacier. Li Tianlan's eyes seemed to contain amazing divine light. Until this moment, he really saw his own path. The path that could lead him all the way to the end of martial arts. He was not moving forward. On the glacier where he lived, he smashed the thick ice with his bare hands and dug a simple house that was not big but big enough for him and the golden retriever to take shelter from the wind. The house was full of prey. Polar reindeer, polar bear, polar wolf. There were also some special fish in the sea. Li Tianlan became more and more peaceful. It was just that when he did these things, his eyes would always flash with a strange and bright light. The polar day gradually passed. Another spring festival was coming. The polar region, where the temperature dropped to the freezing point again, ushered in a snowstorm. For the first time, Li Tianlan's palm held divine punishment on his back. Divine punishment was still scarlet as yesterday. The long sword was slightly wide and straight. However, compared to the past, it seemed to lack a lot of the heavy and sharp feeling. Divine punishment was very light as a feather. Li Tianlan still did not draw the sword. In the boundless darkness of the polar night, the snowstorm was howling fiercely. Li Tianlan walked into the snowstorm and began to wield divine punishment with its scabbard. The golden retriever was gnawing the roasted meat in the house that Li Tianlan dug, whimpering happily. Li Tianlan was waving the sword. His movements were slow. It looked clumsy. The scarlet sword with its scabbard cut through the fierce snowstorm, with a dull whine. Li Tianlan did not use his strength, but explored the sword intent that had long been engraved in his bones with the smallest effort. That was the 24 moves of sword. The first blade Wuji. The second blade Elingxi. The third blade Annihilation. The fourth blade Violent Thunder. The fifth blade Flying Snow. The sixth blade, until the 23rd blade. There was only half a move in the 24 moves of sword. Li Tianlan simply skipped that half move and started from the first blade again, repeating the cycle. His movements became lighter and lighter, as if he was waving divine punishment in his hand at will. But the sword intent in the snowstorm gradually became clear. One after another, the sword intents merged perfectly in the snowstorm. Li Tianlan's movements began to speed up. The first blade was still the first blade, but it seemed to have become something else. All the sword intent began to change. The perfect circulation of sword intent was torn into pieces by Li Tianlan, and was in a mess. All the sword intent finally shattered and disappeared. Only the snowstorm was still howling, as if mocking something. Li Tianlan calmly withdrew the sword. Meditation, rest, and waving the sword. The darkness in the polar sun was unchanged. The spring festival had passed. Li Tianlan's sword intent became more and more chaotic. The first blade was not like the first blade, and the absolute sword was not the absolute sword. It was so chaotic that it was even ridiculous. But Li Tianlan was not discouraged. He saw the road that only belonged to him. It was so clear that there was no reason to give up. What was the invincible realm? That was the extreme sublimation of the 4 realms of martial arts. Every invincible realm expert had his own martial arts philosophy. They might be superior to others in the same realm, but in their own philosophy, they were definitely the strongest. That was the invincible realm in the traditional sense. It was the invincible realm, not the invincible realm. Any inheritance station was the path that the ancestors had walked. Looking down from the perspective of the invincible realm, the inheritance was the starting point. Different inheritances meant different levels of starting points. There were too many amazing geniuses and successors of top inheritances, but they were stuck in the half-step invincible realm. Because to move up in this realm, what was needed was one's own faith and the tempering of martial arts. That was the process of abandoning the inheritance to pursue the true self. One step further, and the world would be wide open. One step back and disappear into the crowd. Or even beyond redemption. After the thunder-shocking realm, any genius who aspired to the invincible realm would choose to temper his martial arts. And the 4 realms of martial arts were the most direct ladder for them to seek the true self. Chi controlling, ice condensing, fire flaming, thunder shocking. In order to find their own martial arts, they would keep trying and tempering. This process might last 5 years, 10 years, or even a lifetime. The Wang family of Beihai had the inheritance of Sword of Six Paths of Reincarnation. The Li family had the inheritance of Map of God of War. But every invincible realm expert from these two forces was unique. Wang Tianzong's Sword of Six Paths of Reincarnation would definitely be different from that of the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. Li Honghe and Li Guangtu's 24 moves of sword would also be different. Li Tianlan was also tempering his martial arts now. But he no longer needed the so-called 4 realms of martial arts. He didn't temper his own realm, but his sword. His own sword. In the polar night of the polar region, his sword intent was getting more and more chaotic. The time for him to swing his sword was getting less and less. The polar night was still enveloping the sky. Li Tianlan was still swinging his sword. The chaotic sword intent was constantly entangled in the cold polar region. Li Tianlan was getting calmer and calmer. His sword intent was still chaotic, but the sword intent it carried was getting less and less. The sword intent began to disappear bit by bit as he swung his sword. When Li Tianlan swung his sword again, there was no sword intent in the polar region. Wherever the long sword passed, there was nothing. Li Tianlan himself was stunned. He put away divine punishment, sat on the glacier, and looked up at the night. The golden retriever came to him and rubbed his arm. "We should go." Li Tianlan touched the golden retriever's head and whispered. There was no longer any scenery worthy of his nostalgia, because there was no sword intent here. On this day, the polar region was still dark. On this day, it was the 2nd day of February in the Zhongzhou state calendar. The dragon raised its head. Li Tianlan looked down at divine punishment in his hand. He held the hilt with his palm. The whole divine punishment began to shake violently. Li Tianlan's eyes were as calm as water. He pulled out the famous sword of the Lin clan little by little. "Thank you," he said softly. There was no sword intent in divine punishment. The sword intent accumulated for hundreds of years had completely disappeared. The blade was completely out of the sheath. The cold wind blew over. Crack! Divine punishment, which had existed for hundreds of years, shook. With the cold wind, dense cracks appeared on the scarlet and heavy long sword. Li Tianlan loosened his hand. Divine punishment fell down. Before it landed, it began to disintegrate in the cold wind. The metal fragments fluttered in the air as if they were weightless. In front of Li Tianlan's eyes, they became invisible dust in the wind. There was no more divine punishment in the world. Li Tianlan stood up. In the night wind, the invisible sword intent surged under the night sky like mountains and seas. The whole glacier began to shake wildly. Li Tianlan carried the golden retriever on his back. A bright white dress directly broke through the shaking polar night and went straight into the sky. The glacier below was silently cut open, and the thick ice fell into the sea. The invisible sword intent poured directly into the sea from the sky. In the huge waves, the polar night in the polar region lit up. Chapter 288. Li Tianlan boarded a cargo ship heading directly from the polar region to Zhongzhou state. This wasn't too difficult of a task. From Zhongzhou state to snow country to the polar ground. Li Tianlan didn't have a passport, so he was a stowaway. But the return trip was very simple. He didn't have a passport, but he had the highest badge of Sai City. The polar region was rich in resources. Whether it was the South Pole or the North Pole, the major forces would more or less establish strongholds. So did Sai City. His badge was enough for the people of Sai City in the polar region to arrange a return route for him as soon as possible. It was easy and discreet enough. The land and sea were calm. The freighter gradually moved away from the Arctic Ocean. The glaciers and coldness were fading away, and the climate began to warm up. Li Tianlan and the golden retriever, who had long been accustomed to the cold, were not used to it. From the polar region back to Zhongzhou state, they took the Northeast Sea route, starting from the Arctic Ocean, passing through the Pacific Ocean, and finally entering the Yellow Sea, arriving at Qingdao in Dongshan province of Zhongzhou state. In 1 month, they had traveled more than 6,000 kilometers. The tenacious golden retriever began to jump around after the first few days. After living in the snow country and the extreme low for nearly 3 years, it was not easy to survive. Now that they were finally in a normal environment, the golden retriever immediately felt like a husky. Li Tianlan spent most of his time on the ship in a daze. He didn't get seasick, but he didn't really like the environment around him except for seawater. What he missed was this feeling. The ship sailed on the sea. Behind him was the glacier, and in front of him was the golden age. Behind him was freedom, and in front of him were fetters. Most of the time, he would stand on the deck and look at the way he came. The cargo ship sailed forward. The stern of the ship drew a clear white wave. There were no glaciers in sight, and the weather was no longer cold. Li Tianlan was finally sure that the so-called freedom was really far away from him. All the worries, conspiracies, swords, deceptions, and turbulent times in the bustling city were getting closer and closer to him. He began to miss the quietness on the glacier. He knew very well that if there were no accidents in this life, the past few years would be the only relaxing time in his life. That year, Li Tianlan was 22 years old. He already had the ability to shoulder more responsibilities. Freedom was good, but that was not his life. Li Tianlan looked up at the sky. He shaved off his already long beard and briefly combed his hair, revealing a clean and warm face. The sky was filled with the glow of sunset. The clouds were illuminated by the setting sun into a fiery red color, and the gorgeous light and shadow were projected on the endless sea. Under the setting sun, there was no wind or waves. It was a beautiful scene. He suddenly remembered a saying. When I first met the world, when I was a teenager. Li Tianlan laughed. Under the sky and in the setting sun when he was 22 years old, his laughter was ignorant and nostalgic. The golden retriever circled around him. Li Tianlan opened his hands. The big dog pounced on him. Li Tianlan gently stroked the soft fur of the golden retriever and looked at the deep sea with a calm face. There was no sword in his hand, but his arms exuded a power that seemed to be able to overturn the entire sea. Li Tianlan began to recall. He thought of the Li family, the remaining uncles of the Li family, the East Emperor Palace, Li Beitian and Ning Qiancheng, the Samsara Palace, Sai City, Tribulation and Situd Songyue, the Dongqing clan, Dongqing Wudi and Bai Qingqian. Something seemed to have been forgotten. Li Tianlan knew that he hadn't forgotten. He just kept silent and didn't want to think about it. He also thought of the divine punishment that was broken into pieces and blown into dust by the wind in the polar region. Li Tianlan's eyes were surrounded by sword light. There was no sword in his hand. At this moment, Li Tianlan knew where he should go. The human emperor was broken in heaven capital. Divine punishment was broken in the polar region. He needed a new weapon, a powerful one. In May the Pacific Ocean was cool and hot. Li Tianlan's mind had completely flown back to Zhongzhou State. Because of the final battle in Heaven Capital, the official opening time of the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy was delayed for several months, from early spring to early autumn. This year was the third year. It was also the graduation year of the Sky Academy. If the official opening time began in early autumn, then the last maneuver of the two academies should be from the end of June to the beginning of July. Li Tianlan was just in time for this maneuver. That would be the starting point of the East Emperor Palace. In the future, whether the East Emperor Palace would be completely integrated into the system or become a free force, the final maneuver of the two academies would be a threshold that could not be bypassed. After that, Li Tianlan would face the great pressure brought to him by Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai in Zhongzhou State. He just didn't know how his grandfather was. The old master's physical condition directly determined whether Li Tianlan would face a narrow escape or a certain death in Zhongzhou State. He touched the palm of the golden retriever subconsciously a little harder. The golden retriever whimpered and shook its head hard in Li Tianlan's arms. Li Tianlan was shocked and subconsciously let go. The golden retriever looked at him innocently and seemed to be a little wronged. "I'm sorry." Li Tianlan smiled apologetically. "I'll ask Senior Yu to cook a delicious meal for you when we go back." He used to be the chef of the Hidden Dragon Sea. "I'll let you enjoy the treatment of the giants of Zhongzhou State." The golden retriever wanted to rub against him again. Li Tianlan pressed it down casually. Looking at the setting sun in the sky, he stood up from the deck and said, "Let's go back." He had a separate room on the ship. Sai City arranged everything very well. The captain, who seemed to have a clean background, seemed to be one of them. They specially prepared cigarettes and a small amount of wine for him. 3 meals a day were also specially sent to him. It was standard VIP treatment. Li Tianlan was not dissatisfied with it. But after drifting on the sea for a long time, his desire to return to Zhongzhou State began to become more and more urgent. The cargo ship became quieter at night. The golden retriever lay on Li Tianlan's bed. Li Tianlan sat at the head of the bed and meditated. His meditation now was closer to thinking. Because his will was already perfect, under the situation of absolute focus, his path became increasingly clear. 3 years. In the cold wind and snow all over the sky, Li Tianlan couldn't tell how much he had gotten, but he knew he had gotten a lot. The most perfect embryonic form of martial arts, the most intangible sword intent, and the strongest body. The 3 years after the great breakthrough were not wasted. Instead, everything became absolutely perfect. Li Tianlan began to fade the traces of the 24 moves of sword in his mind. He was exploring his own martial Tao, and also his own sword intent. He had come to this point on his road, and he no longer wanted the different 24 moves of sword. Just like what he said to Situ Tsangyue on the top of Mount Taibai 3 years ago. No matter how different it was, the 24 moves of sword was still the 24 moves of sword. What he wanted was his own sword intent. The martial arts that belonged only to him. The night gradually passed. The starry sky on the sea, which was far more brilliant than on land, disappeared quietly when the morning light came. There was light outside, but the sky was gloomy. Li Tianlan woke up from meditation and encountered the first storm since he boarded the ship. The sky on the rain. The sea under the rain. In the raging wind, the sky and the sea were shaking at the same time. Dark clouds covered the sky, and the surface of the sea during the day seemed to have entered the polar night. The endless sea under the dark clouds looked desperate black. The heavy rain drifted down, and huge waves rushed to the deck with the wind. The cargo ship, which was not small, was shaking in the wind and rain. Thunder sounded one after another. The golden retriever was no longer by Li Tianlan's side. Instead, it went to the corner of the room. Li Tianlan stood steadily on the deck, looking at the boiling and extremely fierce deep sea. His eyes were shining, and his whole body was surrounded by the illusory but domineering sword intent. The rain was crushed around him. Li Tianlan stood there without feeling anything, quietly looking at the irresistible deep sea that seemed to be in a rage. The storm came and went quickly. The dark clouds were blown away by the wind. The rain was still. The warm sunshine soon shone on the sea again, and there was a sparkling light in sight. Li Tianlan, whose clothes were still dry and fresh, looked into the distance. There was a brilliance in the distant sky. A colorful rainbow bridge across the sea suddenly appeared on the calm sea. The color was so clear. It was far away, but it seemed to be within reach. Li Tianlan was in a trance. He looked deeply into the distance. The rainbow seemed to be getting closer. There was an island floating in the air. The islands appeared in the air in pieces, becoming clearer and clearer, like a continent floating in the air. The continuous islands floated between the rainbows. Antique palaces, flowers and jungles covering the archipelago, people on the islands, everything appeared clearly in his sight. There seemed to be a layer of mist separating the islands from the deep sea, making everything look far away and close. The rainbow was dazzling. The islands became clearer and clearer. In the rainbow, it was the rarest mirage of the sea after the rain. Li Tianlan was completely fascinated. An exquisite figure appeared clearly in his line of sight. She stood above the tallest palace on the island, seeming to overlook the deep sea or the horizon. The sea breeze blew her hair. She wore a red dress, and her long hair and skirt fluttered at the same time. Li Tianlan seemed to have smelled the delicate fragrance that haunted his dreams, but dared not think about. He looked at her quietly, his eyes unblinking. You are the moonlight pouring down at night. You are the clouds floating in the sky. You are the most touching fragrance in the world. That was Qin Wei Bai. Qin Wei Bai was in the rainbow, in the mirage. Such a perfect and unparalleled Qin Wei Bai. The indifference, stubbornness, and persistence in Li Tianlan's heart completely disappeared in an instant. He thought about the reunion between them in the future. But he never thought that it would be such a reunion. They were thousands of miles apart between the sky and the sea. The light refracted a large area of the island and Qin Wei Bai, the cruelest and the most gentle. Li Tianlan's figure subconsciously rushed out of the deck and rose high into the sky. The sword intent that was completely out of control was boiling in the sea. A huge wave as high as 100 meters suddenly rose in front of the freighter. The sword intent was swirling in the sea. The huge wave was getting higher and higher. In the sea, a mountain seemed to rise in front of the freighter. Li Tianlan stood on the huge wave and kept rising. He looked at Qin Wei Bai. Qin Wei Bai couldn't see him. Such a reunion. The huge wave was still rising. The mirage was getting farther and farther away. Standing between the rainbows, she was also getting more and more illusory. This was the distance between him and her. Even if it could topple mountains and overturn seas, it couldn't reach. Chapter 289. Li Tianlan still didn't know where Qin Wei Bai was. He wasn't even sure if what the mirage reflected in front of him was the real scene, and how far it was from him. The illusory mirage began to disappear. The cloud-like figure gradually dimmed. Li Tianlan returned to the deck. He watched everything disappear in front of him, but there was nothing he could do. The sky cleared up after the rain. The rainbow in the sky became clearer. All the sailors and the captain of the cargo ship respected Li Tianlan like a god. It was no secret that there were 4 realms of martial arts and absolute masters in the world. But how many people had seen a force that was close to the power of heaven to set off a 1,000-meter-high wave in the vast deep sea with his own power? Under everyone's careful service, the cargo ship gradually sailed out of the Pacific Ocean and into the Yellow Sea. In the following days, Li Tianlan never left the deck. He kept looking at the direction where the mirage disappeared. But the sea was no longer gloomy, and there was no heavy rain. Naturally, there was no mirage that he had been longing for. In the middle of June, the cargo ship entered Dongshan province of Zhongzhou State. It docked at Qingdao in the evening. The sound of water faded away. Li Tianlan walked out of the dock with Golden Retriever. The hustle and bustle of Zhongzhou State came to him in an instant. The wind and snow in the polar region were dissipating. The mirage was dissolving. The sword intent began to fall silent. Li Tianlan's eyes were in a trance. He looked at Zhongzhou State, which he had left for 3 years, as if a lifetime had passed. "It's good that you're back." A voice suddenly sounded in front of Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan came to his senses. Without a sound, a figure in black had already appeared in front of him. Black casual clothes, black casual pants, casual leather shoes, short hair, and a pale but slightly delicate face. Li Tianlan's mouth twitched and he said, "Martial uncle, you're really becoming more and more modern." Tribulation's appearance was far younger than his actual age. He looked like a young man less than 30 years old. Now his outfit made him look a few years younger. Li Tianlan remembered the black robe and silver mask when he first met Tribulation. The unparalleled shadow formula, the forceful and domineering stop formula, and the sharp and cold kill formula. At that time, Tribulation was a mysterious and powerful death hidden under the black robe and silver mask. But now, although it was not the first time he had seen such a Tribulation, he still couldn't accept it. Sai City no longer needs to hide behind snow mountains and masks. Tribulation's tone was indifferent. "It's meaningless." Li Tianlan fell silent. Sai City had always stood aloof from worldly affairs. Every top assassin wore a mask and rarely competed with other forces in the country for any resources. They just lived quietly on the snow-covered mountain top under the mask. But as he became the young governor of Sai City, everything would change completely. Tribulation coughed softly and wiped the corner of his mouth with his fingers calmly. Li Tianlan vaguely saw a trace of red. His heart suddenly sank. Looking at Tribulation's pale face, he asked, "The jade seal is useless?" "It works." Tribulation glanced at him, waved his hand and said, "Let's talk in the car." From Sai City to Zither Island, Tribulation came to pick up Li Tianlan alone, without even bringing a driver. Li Tianlan put the golden retriever in the back seat and sat in the passenger seat. Looking at Tribulation's pale face, he asked in a deep voice, "Martial uncle, what's going on?" Tribulation went straight into the invincible realm in Heaven Capital. It had been 3 years now. He couldn't imagine how serious the injury was that Tribulation hadn't fully recovered in 3 years under the influence of the Imperial Jade Seal's massive luck. "I'm much better than before you left." Tribulation drove away from the dock and said calmly, "But the injury was so severe that the luck in the Jade Seal could only slowly neutralize my injury. Unless I can make a big breakthrough and start over like you, I can only endure it." He paused and laughed at himself. "At my age, how can I have the qualification to start over?" Li Tianlan looked at Tribulation seriously. Tribulation was the strongest assassin in the dark world. Now that his injury had recovered a little and his breath was restrained, Li Tianlan couldn't see any clue. "So now," he asked softly, "Invincible realm?" There was no expression on Tribulation's face. "It's almost the same as before the breakthrough. I'm injured and can only exert about half of my strength, but I should not be worse than Gu Qianchuan." Gu Qianchuan was the first elder of Kunlun City and was not worse than him. It sounded good, but he was the most amazing assassin in the dark world. It was not bad that he had recovered to this extent, but it was definitely not good news. "What about you?" Tribulation handed Li Tianlan a cigarette and suddenly asked, "In 3 years, how is the recovery from Huading to the polar region, which is tens of thousands of miles?" Li Tianlan took the cigarette and lit it. He took a deep breath, feeling the long-lost taste of tobacco and the dizziness in his brain. He thought about it carefully and said softly, "Still outside the invincible realm." His martial arts had no 4 realms of martial arts, only sword intent. Sword intent was not invincible, which meant he was outside the invincible realm. Without a life-and-death fight, Li Tianlan didn't know what his current combat strength was. Tribulation took a deep look at him and said softly, "Let's go back first." Li Tianlan hesitated for 2 or 3 seconds and finally shook his head. He whispered, "Martial uncle, I won't go to Mount Taibai." Tribulation subconsciously slowed down the car. He went to see Li Tianlan. As a result, the golden retriever in the back row rushed over and blocked Li Tianlan's expression with a huge dog head. "Why?" Tribulation asked. Li Tianlan didn't speak. It was not that he didn't like Mount Taibai, but Situ Tsangyue gave him a very complicated feeling. The hidden god of Zhongzhou State did not have any malice, but in Li Tianlan's feeling, the other party's kindness did not seem to be for him, or even for the Li family. 3 years ago, he saw Situ Tsangyue on Mount Taibai. Situ Tsangyue looked at him as if she was looking at another person. Li Tianlan knew who she was looking at. But he didn't like this feeling and didn't know how to face that kind of gaze. "My sister has been collecting news about Snow Country and the polar region in recent years. Although she didn't say it, she secretly went to Snow Country once, but she didn't find you. There are not many people in Sai City, but you haven't met all of them. Everyone wants to see how the young governor is after the great victory. Secretary Bai went to Mount Taibai almost every month to ask about you in recent years. She cried every time. She was very sad. I never knew that the strong woman in politics could be so fragile." Li Tianlan knew that Tribulation was talking about Bai Qingqian, Dong Qingwudi's wife. Li Tianlan had never thought of her for 3 years. They only met once and didn't talk much. He thought he should have forgotten her long ago. But now when he heard Tribulation mention her again, Li Tianlan had a feeling that he couldn't breathe. That feeling was not oppressive, but strange. "Go to Luojing Zhongyuan." Li Tianlan interrupted Tribulation and said in a low voice. Tribulation said no more and drove in another direction in silence. At the same time, he changed the topic and said, "Dongqing Wudi has been promoted. In the years you were away, the relationship between the academics and the giant group was not affected. He went to Yuzhou last year." "The army headquarters?" Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. The Border Control Corps had a saying in Zhongzhou State that the Border Control Corps was a small army headquarters. The commander of the Border Control Corps went to the capital and competed for the position of the army headquarters. If he went to any other place, it could be said that he was promoted in public, but demoted in private. Tribulation said. He took over Chi Baitsong's position. Chi Baitsong retired last year. Li Tianlan said. He knew Chi Baitsong, the flag figure of the Special Warfare Group. In the past few years, he had been the backbone to check and balance President Li Huaqing's military power. He retired so smoothly that Dongqing Wudi became the nominal number 2 in the military of Zhongzhou State, but actually the number 1 in the military. This was somewhat unexpected. As Dongqing Wudi changed from a member of the decision-making committee to a director, and became a real giant, the giant group's right to speak in Zhongzhou State would be greatly enhanced. In this matter, the Wang family of Beihai also contributed. The Dongqing clan never made a losing deal. In the border war 3 years ago, the Border Control Corps penetrated 800 miles into the territory of Annan State. That land, together with the elites of the Border Control Corps, was handed over by the Dongqing clan to the Wang family of Beihai in exchange for the support of the Wang family of Beihai to Dongqing Wudi. Now the situation in Zhongzhou State is a bit chaotic. You came back at the right time. Li Tianlan silently thought about the impact of the change at the top level on him and suddenly said, "Who will take over the Border Control Corps?" For the time being, Dongqing Wudi is the commander of the army. The position is a bit difficult to produce. As for who will be in charge, it depends on the next transaction of the major groups. Tribulation's tone was indifferent, but his words were enough to make Li Tianlan realize the great changes that had happened and were about to happen in Zhongzhou State. He narrowed his eyes and said no more. It was night when they got off the boat from Qin Island. When they arrived at Luojing, it was close to midnight. Although Tribulation had informed the Dongqing clan in advance, when the car drove to the mountain occupied by the Dongqing clan, Tribulation and Li Tianlan couldn't help but be a little surprised. Before going up the mountain road, Dongqing Hongguang, the old patriarch of the Dongqing clan, was standing there with his butler, motionless. No one knew how long they had been waiting. Tribulation was surprised. Li Tianlan felt ridiculous, and even a little scared. He didn't think he was qualified to let the spiritual leader of the giant group wait for him at the foot of the mountain overnight. Old Master. Li Tianlan quickly got out of the car and held Dongqing Hongguang's hand with both hands. The Dongqing clan really couldn't find any fault with him. Li Tianlan was moved and had nothing to say for a while. "Son, it's good that you're back." Wudi was going to come back, but there was a temporary meeting. When he came, it would be dawn. Dongqing Hongguang smiled and patted Li Tianlan's palm. His eyes were a little tired, but full of kindness. "Rushi is already on the way. You came faster than I thought." "Thank you." Li Tianlan looked at Dongqing Hongguang and said in a dry voice, "Thank you. Don't say it too early." Dongqing Hongguang smiled and said, "There is a bigger surprise to come." He looked at Tribulation standing beside Li Tianlan and said with a smile, "Your Highness, you've worked hard." Tribulation shook his head. He was in the invincible realm, but in front of Li Tianlan, he was only willing to be a deputy governor standing beside the young governor. "Old Master, do you mean that the thing that the Dongqing clan has been researching in recent years has been successful?" Tribulation asked. Dongqing Hongguang laughed and said, 2 months ago it was successfully completed. Tianlan, you came back just in time. 3 years ago, Senior Li sent the murderous weapon, the Legend of Qin, and you asked Wudi to send the fragments of the Li family's murderous weapon. Today I give you a real murderous weapon. It may not be the strongest, but it's definitely the most suitable for you. Li Tianlan's eyes lit up. A new weapon. This was the main purpose of his coming to Zhongyuan. "Where is it?" he asked subconsciously. "Not here." Dongqing Hongguang smiled and said, "In the secret laboratory in Spirit Treasure City. I'll take you there now." But Tianlan, the person who used the Legend of Qin to create a new murderous weapon, is my nephew. His lifelong wish is to create a real murderous weapon. The previous Mad Strike and Sky Attack were made by him, but they were far less powerful than the murderous weapon. Until he saw the Legend of Qin this time, he simply devoted all his attention to it. In 3 years he was too ashamed to say that he created a new murderous weapon. But now the one in Spirit Treasure City has indeed replaced the legend of Qin, so... He hesitated and said, "He wants to name your weapon." It was definitely an honor in the dark world to name a murderous weapon that could be handed down for hundreds of thousands of years. "No problem. It's a small matter," Li Tianlan answered without hesitation. He didn't care about the name of the weapon at all. The human emperor of divine punishment sounded domineering, but in fact, he didn't mind even if it was called grass or wildflower. "If it's a small matter, Tianlan, how about you promise me something big?" Dongqing Hongguang glanced at Li Tianlan and said with a chuckle. Li Tianlan's heart sank. Thinking of the engagement, he coughed and said, "What do you want me to promise?" "It's not what you're worried about." Dongqing Hongguang laughed and scolded. He did want to mention it, but after hearing Li Tianlan's words, he simply changed the topic and said, "I couldn't find you in the past few years. Now that you're here, how about you come back this Mid-Autumn Festival, and spend the Mid-Autumn Festival together?" The Mid-Autumn Festival was the day of reunion. The old man had been longing for the real reunion for many years. Li Tianlan hesitated a little, and then shook his head. Dongqing Hongguang's eyes were dim and puzzled. If Li Tianlan didn't come back, then Bai Qingqian, who hadn't come back for many years, wouldn't come back either. How could they reunite? "Why?" Dongqing Hongguang asked softly. "Old master." Li Tianlan gave a wry smile and shook his head, saying, "The Mid-Autumn Festival and New Year's Eve have nothing to do with me since I was born. In the place where I live, the Li family doesn't celebrate the Mid-Autumn Festival." The Mid-Autumn Festival, New Year's Eve, and the Lantern Festival. These traditional festivals had nothing to do with the Li family as long as Li Tianlan could remember. For ordinary people, it might be very festive. But for the Li family, such festivals were only painful. So the Li family never celebrated the Mid-Autumn Festival. It was just New Year's Eve. Chapter 290. As the leading military tycoon in Zhongzhou State, the Dongqing clan established or indirectly controlled military groups all over Zhongzhou State. But only those who really knew the inside story knew that the essence of the Dongqing clan was their own secret research and laboratories. In the past 2 decades, the Dongqing clan had introduced 5 new technologies, each of which caused a huge sensation. 17 years ago, the intercontinental long-range missile codenamed Aurora had been developed to the 3rd generation, and it was still the main missile of Zhongzhou State. 14 years ago, the Black Dragon Army, a subordinate of the Border Praetorian Corps, was equipped with the Great Wall defense system of the Dongqing clan. It was upgraded a few times and was still working perfectly. 12 years ago, the individual combat weapon Mad Strike that could be mass-produced came out. 8 years ago, after careful consideration, Zhongzhou State finally gave a small number of precious materials to the Dongqing clan at a great cost. In less than 3 years, the Dongqing clan proved its top-notch technology in the field of individual combat armor. In 3 years, the military allocated funds 6 times, and the Dongqing clan made a total of 4 armors. They were Azure Dragon, White Tiger, Vermilion Bird, and Black Tortoise. 4 Spirits armor, which was now famous throughout the dark world. 5 years ago, the Dongqing clan began to develop an upgraded version of Mad Strike. So in the Battle of Heaven capital 3 years ago, Li Tianlan got the first finished product developed by the Dongqing clan. A gun that could threaten a thunder-shocking realm expert. The most important thing was mass production. It was a magical word. This was the Dongqing clan. A clan that flashed with wisdom and technology in the bloody slaughter. It was powerful, huge, deep-rooted, and full of talents. Few people knew where the most essential and hidden weapon laboratory of the Dongqing clan was. Most people could only guess that it was in Zhongzhou, but they didn't even know the general direction. But Dongqing Hongguang really trusted Li Tianlan 100%. On the way to Spirit Treasure City, even Tribulation was lucky enough to go with him. How important was the laboratory that could experiment and successfully transform murderous weapons? Even on the way, Li Tianlan could clearly feel the weight behind Dongqing Hongguang's trust. The vehicle was driving on the highway in the night. Dongcheng Hanguang, who was sitting with Li Tianlan, patted Li Tianlan's palm and whispered, "Our laboratory in Spirit Treasure City is the metal laboratory, which is also the one hidden deep. The murderous weapons material is special, so it needs to be activated there. My nephew, you should call him uncle, got a lot of inspiration in the process of transforming murderous weapons. Now he is over there studying the new generation of alloy technology in Zhongzhou State. I don't know much about it, but it is said that if there is a breakthrough in that technology, the defense of the active armored tanks in Zhongzhou State will be doubled. Today you guys should get to know each other. In the future, if you need any weapons, you can look for Wudi to get the approval, and then get Wujin to make them for you. We're family, so don't stand on ceremony." Li Tianlan nodded, not knowing what to say. "Your Highness, if Sai City needs anything, the Dongqing clan is willing to do our best." Dongqing Hanguang looked at Tribulation, who was sitting in the passenger seat, and said slowly, "Thank you." Tribulation nodded, but he sighed in his heart. This was probably old Master Dongqing's love for Li Tianlan. The distance between Luojing and Spirit Treasure was not far. Uncle En, the butler of the Dongqing clan, drove the car. After entering Spirit Treasure City, they continued to move forward, went out of Hanggu Pass, and finally stopped in a manor less than 2 kilometers away from Hanggu Pass. Li Tianlan, who felt a little uncomfortable, was the first to get out of the car. There was a breeze blowing in the field. Li Tianlan, who had sweat on his body, felt clear-headed. He turned his eyes to the manor. At the gate of the manor, a red sports car was parked there. A tall and slim girl stood by the car and looked at Li Tianlan quietly. Li Tianlan froze for a moment and opened his mouth. He didn't expect to see Dongqing Rushi at first sight after getting out of the car. Dongqing Rushi, who seemed to have been waiting here for a while, walked over gently. The early summer night was a little cool. Dongqing Rushi was dressed more casually. A white off-the-shoulder short-sleeved t-shirt. He wore a pair of blue denim shorts. The shorts were very short. A pair of snow-white, slender, and long legs were exposed. The dark-colored stilettos made a crisp sound as they clicked on the ground. Dongqing Rushi walked up to Li Tianlan and looked into his eyes seriously. Her body was very fragrant, a clear and gentle fragrance with a kind of soft taste. Li Tianlan's eyes fell from her face to her snow-white shoulders, and then to her slender and straight legs. The night wind blew up Dongqing Rushi's hair. Her eyes were clear and quiet. She was his fiancée. An idea suddenly came to Li Tianlan's mind. After 3 years, Dongqing Rushi was still beautiful, but there was a hint of fashionable arrogance in her. Li Tianlan was a little dazzled. He coughed and pointed to the gate of the manor as naturally as possible. "Why don't you go in? I don't have the authority." Dongqing Rushi blinked and looked at Li Tianlan's face seriously. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." Li Tianlan nodded. They were not familiar with each other before. They hadn't seen each other for 3 years. And now it was really awkward. He touched his nose and braced himself to talk awkwardly. Dongqing Rushi had already opened her arms. "Hug me." Her voice was soft, and she looked at Li Tianlan with a little caution. Li Tianlan had a headache. In his sight he saw Uncle En, the butler of the Dongqing clan, walking to the gate of the manor. Tribulation and Dongqing Hanguang, who had gotten out of the car, stood together. Tribulation was looking at the scenery in the night. Dongqing Hanguang's eyes had already turned over. Li Tianlan saw that the old man was looking at him and Dongqing Rushi. His eyes were full of expectation. This kind of emotion was so strong that it even seemed to be a little pleading. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly twitched. At this moment he really realized that in this engagement, he had reached the point of no retreat. Dongqing Rushi opened her hands in front of him, and her eyes were so careful. Li Tianlan took a step forward and held Dongqing Rushi in his arms. It was very light, very soft, very fragrant. Dongqing Rushi put her arms around Li Tianlan's waist. Her little face gently rubbed Li Tianlan's chin and she whispered, "I missed you so much." Li Tianlan had a complicated feeling in his heart. From an angle that he couldn't see, Dongqing Rushi's eyes were also complicated and confused. It had been 3 years. She didn't know whether she missed Li Tianlan or not. just like she opened her hands in front of Li Tianlan, but she wasn't sure if she really wanted him to hug her. She only knew that if she did this, Grandpa would be very happy, and so would her father and mother. That was enough. Nothing else mattered at all. She didn't think there was anything unacceptable about Li Tianlan. Not at all. Because she had received too much since she was a child. Music, dance, poetry, painting, calligraphy, massage, embroidery, cooking she had been learning since she was a child. Because this was something that Li Tianlan might like. Martial arts, finance, politics, power play, psychology, interpersonal relations. She had also been learning since she was a child. Because this was something that could help Li Tianlan. She had known Li Tianlan's existence since she was a child. From the time she could remember, countless people had told her that her future husband was Li Tianlan. This name was like an instinctive curse that had long been deeply engraved in her bones. Even many times, Dongqing Rushi felt that she was not Dongqing Rushi. In this world, her only identity seemed to be Li Tianlan's fiancé. It really didn't matter whether she liked him or not. She had to stand with him. Only in this way could Dongqing Rushi feel the meaning of her existence. Uncle An's figure was stopped at the gate of the manor. Several middle-aged men who looked very ordinary appeared at the gate with extremely restrained aura. Uncle An did the registration meticulously and keyed in 3 passwords on the door before the door slowly opened to both sides. A middle-aged man who looked a little dull and old-fashioned seemed to have gotten the news and quickly walked out of the gate. He was the first to walk to Dongqing Hongguang. This seemed to be a middle-aged man who rarely showed his expression. Looking at Dongqing Hongguang, he forced an uncomfortable smile on his stiff face. He bowed meticulously and said, "Uncle." Dongqing Hongguang nodded and pointed to Tribulation beside him. "This is His Highness Situ Wanjie of Sai City." The middle-aged man acted as if he had never heard of this name. He made 2 random sounds and turned to look at Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi, who were hugging each other. He walked over quickly. The footsteps awakened Dongqing Rushi, who was a little confused. She straightened up from Li Tianlan's arms and looked at the middle-aged man coming over. She said in a clear voice, "This is Uncle." Before Li Tianlan could react, the middle-aged man had introduced himself. "I'm Dongqing Wujin." Dongqing Wujin didn't know many people in the Dark World. But many people in the Dark World knew him. He was the honorary dean of the Academy of Military Sciences of Zhongzhou State, a senior academician, a doctor of metallography, precision mechanics, and physics. He was one of the pioneers in the field of weapon research in Zhongzhou State, and the soul of all the secret weapon laboratories of the Dongqing clan. Dongqing Wujin's figure was thin. Standing in front of Li Tianlan, he only gave him the feeling that he was not talkative and dull. Li Tianlan couldn't call him uncle. He could only vaguely call him Dean. Dongqing Wujin didn't mind. He just said with a dull face, "Your weapon is behind you." He reached out and pointed. Inside the manor, a young man with glasses ran out with a silver suitcase. Everyone stared at the suitcase in his hand. Dongqing Wujin's face was still dull, but his eyes gradually became hot. The silver suitcase was not big, but it contained the highest achievement of his life. The new murderous weapon of the Dark World. Dongqing Wujin took the suitcase. In Li Tianlan's fiery eyes, he entered the complicated password and opened the suitcase. There was one more layer in the suitcase. Enter the password. Open. One more layer, one more layer, one more layer. Li Tianlan's eyes gradually became dull. He looked at Dongqing Wujin, who meticulously carried out his actions, and wondered if this dull uncle was deliberately messing with him. The suitcase was open layer by layer, getting smaller and smaller. Dongqing Wujin finally took out a square box the size of a palm from the suitcase. "Here you are." Dongqing Wujin handed the small box to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took it with a blank face. The box was plain black and unremarkable. He looked at Dongqing Wujin. "Open it." Dongqing Wujin stared at the box in Li Tianlan's hand, breathing fast. Li Tianlan touched the iron box in his hand. There was no password on the iron box, so he directly opened the lid. A weak silver light emitted from the box. The light was overflowing, very gorgeous. Li Tianlan's expression was on the verge of collapse. In the desert, He had a firm will comparable to the heavenly king heart. From Huading to the polar ground, he walked thousands of miles. In 3 years, his will became more focused and his mind became more stable. But at this moment, looking at the things in the box, he still couldn't help but burst into tears. This was the King new murderous weapon. This was the murderous weapon that Dongqing Hongguang said was the most suitable for him? Li Tianlan wondered if the Dongqing clan had any misunderstanding about him. Or it was a misunderstanding at all. Or did they take the wrong thing? He looked at the things in the box with a blank face. The silver light in the box flowed softly. It's so beautiful. Dongqing Rushi looked at it in a daze and whispered. She reached out her hand. It seemed that she wanted to touch the things in the box, but she subconsciously withdrew her hand halfway. Li Tianlan's mouth twitched, and he finally couldn't help saying, it was a bracelet. The fact was obvious to Li Tianlan. In the box, there was a silver bracelet. Or a bracelet. It was a very gorgeous object. The bracelet had almost natural mysterious patterns, and the silver light was soft. It was fine even if a man wore it. But the problem was he didn't come here for the so-called bracelet. The murderous weapon is a metal far beyond the technology of Zhongzhou state. There are many theories about the murderous weapon, such as meteorites from outer space or unknown energy. They all make some sense. But in my opinion, it's more like a silicon-based life. Dongqing Wujin said eagerly. The murderous weapon is not researched. What we can do now is to activate it, because they themselves are powerful weapons. I experimented many times in the process of activating it. This piece of metal emits different wavelengths when it encounters different environments. I can't understand the meaning of those wavelengths for the time being, but I'm more inclined to think that it's their own emotions, but we can't communicate. This metal, I think, is a kind of energy that we can't understand for the time being. The so-called murderous weapon is only a part of its power. If we can thoroughly study the murderous weapon, the energy contained in this piece of metal is even enough to drive an aircraft carrier for a long time. Dongqing Wujin's eyes were burning. He looked at Li Tianlan and then said, but now it seems that it is the most suitable as a murderous weapon in the dark world. How should I use it? Li Tianlan had a headache. It can be stimulated. Dongqing Wujin looked at the bracelet in Li Tianlan's hand and said, it can be stimulated by any energy. The murderous weapon needs time to store energy. I studied the legend of Qin, so I roughly know that any murderous weapon has 2 states. The first is the storage state, and the second is the activation state. The activation state is when the murderous weapon is full of energy, but before it is launched. At that time, it will become the most easy state to vent energy. With its size, it is the most suitable for all kinds of firearms. Because of this, I think they are more like a kind of life. The storage state is their original form. The original form of the legend of Qin is something like a scepter. I used the fragment of the infinite sky to merge with the legend of Qin, and finally turned it into this. Li Tianlan listened carefully. The 12 murderous weapons were extremely mysterious even in the dark world. Very few people knew what secrets they held. Most people only knew that they were irresistibly powerful. If it can store energy one day, I have made a database. The Dongqing clan also has model data of the power of the murderous weapon. Dongqing Wujin said. Li Tianlan's heart skipped a beat. He remembered the battle that made Zhongzhou State's sword emperor Wang Tianzong famous, more than a decade ago. Tens of thousands of meters away, the human emperor directly killed Tianling, an invincible realm expert of night spirit at that time. That battle took place on the border of Zhongzhou State. Dongqing Wudi controlled the border control corps. So he must have a detailed understanding of the power of the human emperor. If the murderous weapon in your hand finishes storing energy, and you are not weaker than Wang Tianzong at that time, the power it can exert should be infinitely close to that of the human emperor. Dongqing Wudi whispered, but after the legend of Qin integrated with the infinite sky, there are some side effects. Its energy storage time will also become very long. I can't calculate the specific time for the time being. Li Tianlan nodded. The human emperor was the most powerful murderous weapon among the 12 murderous weapons. It had the longest range and the longest energy storage time. Now the power of the bracelet in his hand was infinitely close to that of the human emperor, so the energy storage time would naturally be infinitely close. So he smiled, looked at Dongqing Wujin and asked, "So I can only take it with me for the time being? If you don't feel bad about it, you can use it as a cold weapon." Dongqing Wujin's eyes were calm. The murderous weapon can be stimulated by any energy, and after being stimulated, it can also change into any shape. Qi controlling, ice condensing, fire flaming, thunder shocking. These are theoretically energy, and they can all stimulate the murderous weapon. Treating the murderous weapon as a cold weapon. No force could be so extravagant. But Li Tianlan had no choice at all. He narrowed his eyes. The four realms of martial arts were theoretically energy, but in theory these energies could also be said to be sword intent. He put the bracelet on his hand and suddenly clenched his fist. The seemingly invisible sword intent in the air suddenly began to madly gather toward his palm. Li Tianlan's figure almost became completely invisible in the sword intent. In an instant, the silver bracelet on his wrist began to flow and change. The silver light in Li Tianlan's hand stretched along his sword intent. His sword intent was moving forward, and so was the silver light. The bracelet began to disappear. There was a long sword flowing with silver light in Li Tianlan's hand. Once again, the sword intent wrapped the long sword and shaped a new outfit for it. The silver light stretched forward. The sword turned into a silver spear. Then it turned into a silver sky halberd. The shape of the murderous weapon in the state of energy storage was completely stimulated or shaped by sword intent. Li Tianlan's eyes lit up. He looked at Dongqing Wujin and solemnly said, "Dean, please give it a name." "Falling stars," Dongqing Wujin said without hesitation. His face was no longer dull, but extraordinary and sharp. "This murderous weapon is called falling stars." Dongqing Hongguang and Tribulation, who were standing nearby, were stunned at the same time. Falling stars. These four words themselves were a kind of memory. The Dongqing clan once had an expert of the invincible realm. That was Dongqing Hongguang's father. Many years ago, the invincible realm expert of the Dongqing clan ranked third on the divine list. In the entire dark world, only the patriarchs of the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family ranked ahead of him. That was the most glorious period of Zhongzhou state, and also the most glorious period of the Dongqing clan and Jade Pool. And the most powerful unique skill of that expert was called Falling Stars. The Falling Stars sword should have been the 8th move after the 7 swords of Jade Pool. However, that unique skill was short-lived in the dark world and eventually lost, leaving only its name. Li Tianlan took a deep look at Dongqing Wujin and said, "Thank you." The falling stars in the form of the sky halberd vibrated wildly in his hand. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. His figure suddenly disappeared and the next moment he had gone straight into the sky. The sky halberd was already 3 meters long. Li Tianlan held the murderous weapon and pierced the sky. The night passed and the dawn rose. Outside Hanggu Pass, the silver flowing light swept the field with silent waves like a raging sea. The golden retriever stood on the ground and looked up at the sky, roaring. The silver flowing light exploded high in the sky. The silver light flowed in the sky, like falling stars. Li Tianlan stood high in the sky, dressed in white, and the sky halberd was still flowing with silver light. The night gradually dissipated in the barking of the golden retriever. The light of the dawn shone down and fell on Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan slowly descended, with all the light between heaven and earth, like a god with unparalleled elegance. His feet landed on the ground. Chapter 291. People in Zhongyuan province were not the only ones who heard the thunder. The thunder rolled through the depths of the clouds. The sound wave spread and eventually turned into a soft sound between heaven and earth, then disappeared. The Wang family of Beihai. On Mount Dibing, Xian Xuanzi, the metaphysics grandmaster of Zhongzhou state who was a guest on Mount Dibing, suddenly looked up at the sky. The night passed, and the dawn was coming. Mount Dibing was emitting misty light. Looking at the sky from Mount Dibing, the sky was still gray. Xian Xuanzi looked at the sky, and the smile on his face gradually disappeared. His pupils began to contract, and even his body became stiff. Taoist Wang Xiaoyao, who was sitting opposite Xian Xuanzi, was a little surprised. Xian Xuanzi had been in Mount Dibing for 7 days. Except for the first day when Wang Tianzong personally met Xian Xuanzi, Wang Xiaoyao accompanied him for the rest of the days. Many things in Mount Dibing were like this. Xian Xuanzi didn't feel neglected. Wang Xiaoyao's identity was honorable enough. And if Wang Xiaoyao didn't want to be hated, he was definitely a person who was hard to be hated. Wang Xiaoyao was the most popular person in the Wang family of Beihai, whether on the mountain or at the foot of the mountain. When there were disagreements within the Wang family of Beihai, Wang Xiaoyao was usually the peacemaker. When there were conflicts between the southeast factions, Wang Xiaonao was also the mediator. He could even sit with Gu Xingyun, the first elder of Kunlun City, and talk and laugh naturally. There seemed to be no friend or foe in his mind, so everyone could feel his sincerity. Wang Tianzong liked peace. So whenever there were important guests on Mount Dibing, Wang Xiaoyao was the one who accompanied them. Wang Xiaoyao and Xian Xuanzi had a good relationship. They were friends despite their age difference. For Xian Xuanzi, sitting with Wang Xiaoyao was even more comfortable than facing Wang Tianzong. Listen, Xian Xuanzi said in a deep voice. He was still in a clean Taoist robe, holding a horsetail whisk, with a youthful face and white hair. He looked like an immortal. Listen to what? Wang Xiaoyao looked helpless. After spending so much time with Xian Xuanzi, he was used to the metaphysics grandmaster's occasional ramblings. The place where the two of them were was one of the most suitable places for sightseeing in Mount Dibing. Wang Xiaoyao and Xian Xuanzi were waiting for the sunrise. But now when the sky was just lit up, Xian Xuanzi was so excited. Wang Xiaoyao could not understand. Dragon roar. Xian Xuanzi's deep tone was full of solemnity. In fact, he did not hear the clear thunder. But at that moment, he had vaguely heard a dragon's roar. He looked in the direction of the Central Plains province, muttered to himself for a long time, and then said slowly, "The dragon is in the Central Plains." He suddenly turned to look at Wang Xiaoyao and said seriously, "I want to see His Majesty Sword Emperor now. This matter concerns the success or failure of my trip. Be quick." Wang Xiaoyao glanced at him and took out his mobile phone without saying a word. Dawn broke over the horizon. There was a morning breeze on Mount Dibing. The snow-white horsetail whisk in Xian Xuanzi's hand suddenly moved with the wind. The white silk at the front of the horsetail whisk floated up, stood upright, and gently trembled with the wind, like a pale flower without any color. The invisible wind between heaven and earth ran through the whole horsetail whisk. Xian Xuanzi's face changed dramatically. Snap! A crisp and clear sound rang on Mount Dibing. In Wang Xiaoyao's suddenly focused sight, the horsetail whisk in Xian Xuanzi's hand suddenly exploded. Xian Xuanzi spat out a mouthful of blood. The blood spots dyed the broken horsetail whisk red. White mist rose in the pavilion of Mount Dibing. The thick mist suddenly rose and covered a large area of the mountain. The white mist rose high in the sky with Xian Xuanzi's extremely angry gasps. The mist was spreading and condensing. The mountain that was washed by the white mist became greener. The white mist was rising. The morning light completely lit up. The bright morning sun jumped out of the endless sea in the east. The golden light fell, and the white mist floating high in the sky became a cloud. The cloud drifted farther and farther, and finally disappeared completely. Xian Xuanzi, with a pale face and blood on the corner of his mouth, stared at the direction where the cloud disappeared. In front of him, the fragments of the horsetail whisk had completely disappeared. Old baldass! Xian Xuanzi clenched his teeth, and his eyes were full of resentment. Haunting you! Taoist! Wang Xiaoyao finally reacted in the shocking change in front of him. He took a step forward and helped Xian Xuanzi sit down. What the hell is going on? Xian Xuanzi took a deep breath. In an extremely short period of time, his originally white and lustrous hair had completely dimmed, turning into an aged grayish white. He wiped the blood on the corner of his mouth with his trembling palm, and suddenly grasped Wang Xiaoyao. I want to see His Majesty Sword Emperor now. He looked at Wang Xiaoyao's eyes seriously. The distance between them was very close. Wang Xiaoyao could clearly see the ferocious light in his eyes. The sky was completely bright. The long night turned into a day. The sun was shining. In the early summer morning of Mount Dibbing, birds were singing and flowers were fragrant. A violent thunder suddenly broke the silence of Mount Dibbing. A deep and dazzling blue color suddenly appeared on the top of Mount Dibbing. The boundless sword intent exploded on the top of the mountain. The sword intent surged and roared on Mount Dibbing. The raging sea at the foot of the mountain began to surge, and the waves crazily slapped the cliff. The sound of the tide boiled with the spreading sword intent. The blue color on the top of the mountain kept spreading. It blocked the sun and distorted the space. The sound of the wind spread in the light. In the silent world, there were only tens of thousands of dazzling thunderbolts left. The thunderbolts wandered and spread in the air. In the blink of an eye, the thunderbolts that blocked the sun had merged and turned into a giant sword hundreds of meters long. The giant sword rotated in the air, and the sword intent kept falling like rain. Wang Xiaoyao looked at the top of the mountain with surprise. Shengxiao broke through. His voice was filled with joy from the bottom of his heart. Wang Shengxiao had been active in the outside world in recent years. After Li Tianlan, he could be said to be the well-deserved leader of the young generation in Zhongzhou State. Even in the dark world, he had made a name for himself and was known as the heavenly son of Beihai. It was not until 3 months ago that Wang Shengxiao returned to the Wang family of Beihai. He had made further preparations, and after 3 months of silence, he finally succeeded today. That year, Wang Shengxiao was 26 years old. At the age of 26, he was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm with wind and thunder veins. The battle for the heavenly sun. Wang Shengxiao was already at the forefront of the invincible realm. Wang Xiaoyao was high-spirited. But Xian Xuanzi's face grew more and more gloomy. He smiled bitterly, looked at the direction where the thunderbolts floated and scattered, and murmured, "It's too late." "What's too late?" A voice suddenly sounded, extremely calm. It was not Wang Xiaoyao who asked the question. It was Wang Tianzong who quietly appeared in the pavilion. Wang Xiaoyao did not inform him to come. But as soon as he saw Wang Shengxiao break through, Wang Tianzong directly appeared in front of Xian Xuanzi. "The dragon vein has been formed." Xian Xuanzi looked at Wang Tianzong and said bitterly, "Your Majesty, there is no chance." Wang Tianzong frowned. Wang Xiaoyao's body also tightened. The dragon vein. With Li Guangtu's treason, there had been no dragon vein in Zhongzhou State for more than 20 years. This was something that all the big shots in Zhongzhou State knew. Because of this, Zhongzhou State, known as the world's most powerful country, had been experiencing ups and downs in recent years. Now the dragon vein had been formed? Wang Xiaoyao looked at Wang Tianzong, and then at Xian Xuanzi. His mouth moved, but he didn't say anything in the end. Wang Tianzong's eyes were completely focused. "Just now?" he asked. "I don't know." Xian Xuanzi shook his head, and his eyes were really blank. "Maybe just now, or maybe before that. Wu Wei set me up once before he died. I can't grasp the state of the dragon vein now." The luck accumulated over the years was robbed. There was unwillingness and unvented anger in his crying and laughing face. "I lost. Your Majesty, I can't do anything about Shengxiao now." Wang Tianzong was silent. Xian Xuanzi had a high reputation in Zhongzhou State, but in recent years, some people privately said that this metaphysics grandmaster was not as aloof as Great Master Wu Wei at all. Instead, he looked more like a metaphysics grandmaster employed by the Wang family of Beihai. It made sense. Xian Xuanzi had done a lot for the Wang family of Beihai over the years. His trip was said to be a guest, but in fact it was the most critical time in the Wang family of Beihai in these years. For many years he and Great Master Wu Wei had been trying to reshape the dragon vein. Both of them had made their own progress. But their final choices were completely different. Great Master Wu Wei chose Li Tianlan, and Xian Xuanzi chose Wang Shengxiao, who would inherit the dragon vein. To both of them, it would be a huge karma. Xian Xuanzi came to Mount Dibbing this time to transfer all the luck accumulated over the years to Wang Shengxiao, so that Wang Shengxiao could bear the prototype of the dragon vein in one fell swoop. But now the dragon vein had been formed. The infinite luck was directly plundered at the moment when the dragon vein was formed. Wang Shengxiao had lost the chance. Whether it was intentional or not, it could be said that the move completely destroyed the overall plan of the Wang family of Beihai. If such an accident didn't happen, once Wang Shengxiao carried the dragon vein and took a whole set of immortality potions, he could rush into the invincible realm in the shortest time. 3 years. 4 years? Maybe a shorter time. But now this opportunity was gone. The dragon vein is with Li Tianlan, Wang Tianzong said. He didn't use a question sentence, but an affirmative sentence. Xian Xuanzi looked at Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong's eyes were deep and calm, without any emotion. Xian Xuanzi nodded. What will happen to him in the future? Wang Tianzong asked. Xian Xuanzi shook his head and said softly, no one can judge his destiny, and no one can speculate the trend of the dragon vein. In the future, with the dragon vein, the stronger Zhongzhou state is, the stronger Li Tianlan will be. From another perspective, it meant that the stronger Li Tianlan was, the stronger Zhongzhou state would be. Invincible to all enemies, unload your armor when you see the dragon. Xian Xuanzi said in a deep voice, Li Tianlan has come back. He is now in Zhongzhou. Wang Tianzong's body seemed to shake slightly. He thought for a long time and asked, no chance? I'm not sure, Xian Xuanzi said. I can't be sure how long he carries the dragon vein. If it's a short time, it's possible to pull it out, but Shengxiao has no chance. If he can successfully pull out the dragon vein, Xiaoyao and Dijiang are the most suitable. If Li Tianlan is really integrated with the luck of Zhongzhou state, Wang Tianzong looked at Xian Xuanzi deeply. What will happen to the Wang family of Beihai in the future? Xian Xuanzi glanced at Wang Tianzong and thought that the Wang family of Beihai was in a crisis. Wang Shengxiao couldn't enter the invincible realm, and the plan was completely disrupted. What was there to say about the so-called future? He was silent for a long time and then said lightly, I don't know. Not knowing meant that he was not sure. But in the eyes of a real hero, not knowing meant that it was not good. The future of the Wang family of Beihai was not good. Wang Tianzong's eyes flickered and he said calmly, what should I do now? Kill Li Tianlan? Xian Xuanzi was silent for a moment and said lightly, the dragon vein has a foundation. If you want to pull it out, you must do it in the place where the dragon vein was born. He paused, lowered his eyelids and said softly, Your Majesty, if you want to take back the dragon vein, you must first take Lonely Mountain in Linen. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.